Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and let the day begin to fall away from you. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you at all. You may close your eyes whenever you like. The words will still be here, low and steady, however far you drift. Tonight we step through a low wooden door into a shop kept warm against the deep cold of a medieval winter. Snow lies thick along the eaves outside, and the shutters are barred fast against a wind that has not stopped since the middle of the night. But inside, banked low in a stone hearth, a fire glows red beneath its blanket of ash, and the air smells of dried lavender, beeswax, and the sweet dark scent of an elderberry cordial left to steep since yesterday. You are the apothecary of this shop, and tonight we live through one long, quiet winter day inside it together, from the hour before the light to the hour long after the candles are lit again. Nothing frightening waits for us here, only warmth kept against the cold, the slow craft of an old trade, and a season's worth of dried summer herbs finally coming into their use. That is the whole of our purpose tonight, to sit inside the warmth of somebody else's ordinary day, a long time ago, and let the smallness of it carry us gently towards sleep. There will be no bells tolling danger, no plague at the door, no messenger riding hard through the snow. Only frost on the glass, jars on their shelves, a fire that must be tended, and the particular hush that a heavy snowfall lays over a town. Let us begin, as the apothecary always did, in the dark. You wake before any bell has rung, in the small room above the shop, under a heavy woolen coverlet, and a second blanket of sheepskin laid across your feet. The cold has found its way in everywhere else. It sits along the window ledge in a fine crust of frost, and it presses against the inside of the door where the draught comes up from the stair. Your breath shows itself in the dark, a small pale cloud that rises and is gone. For a moment you simply lie still and listen. There is no bird song at this hour in the deep of winter, no cart wheels on the frozen street below, no voices. There is only the low creak of old timber settling against the cold, and very far off, the sound of wind moving over snow that has not been walked on since it fell. You have learned, over enough winters, exactly how long you can lie in that stillness before the fire downstairs grows too weak to save. Wait too long, and what should be a matter of raking coals back to life becomes the harder work of striking a new flame from flint and char cloth, with fingers already stiff from cold. So you rise while the warmth of the bed is still generous, and you do it quickly, the way anyone does in a cold room, pulling on a woolen undershirt, a heavier tunic over it, thick hose, and a felted cap that covers your ears. Your hands find their own way to these things in the dark. You have dressed like this every winter morning for longer than you sometimes remember to count. The stair down to the shop is narrow and steep, worn into a soft dip at its center by years of careful footsteps, and you go down it slowly, one hand trailing the cold stone wall. At the bottom, the shop itself waits in near total darkness, its shape only guessed at, the long counter a paler shadow against the black, the wall of jars behind it a faint suggestion of shapes rather than anything you could name by sight alone. You know this room so well that you do not need the light yet. You could walk it blindfolded, and on some winter mornings in truth, you very nearly do. The hearth is where you go first, always. It sits along the far wall, built of good grey stone, wide enough to hold a decent fire and deep enough to bank one properly at night, which is the entire secret of a warm winter morning. Last night, before you climbed the stair, you raked the last of the evening's fire into a low mound, covered it thickly with a fine grey ash, and left it to smoulder slow and hidden until now. You crouch before it in the dark and draw the ash gently aside with the flat iron poker kept for exactly this purpose, and there, beneath the grey, you find what you were hoping for. A low red heart of coal, still faintly glowing, patient as anything in this shop, having kept its own small warmth alive through the whole of a bitter night, without once needing you. It is a small triumph every single morning, and you allow yourself to feel it as one. You lay on kindling first, thin dry twigs of birch and a few curls of birch bark, saved in a basket beside the hearth for exactly this purpose, and you crouch low and breathe gently across the coals, coaxing rather than forcing. The way you were taught as a boy or a girl learning this trade from someone older and more patient than you thought you would ever manage to become. The kindling catches with a small dry crackle, then a proper flame, orange and eager, and you feed it slowly with slightly larger pieces until you judge it strong enough to take a split log without smothering itself. When the log finally settles and begins to burn steady, you sit back on your heels for a moment and simply watch it, feeling the very first honest warmth of the day reach your face and hands. This is the true beginning of a winter day in an apothecary's shop. Not the opening of the shutters, not the first customer at the door, but this: a fire coaxed patiently back from a bed of ash in the dark. Because everything else that will happen today, every remedy warmed, every tincture kept from freezing solid in its jar, every customer who will stand shivering at your counter later this morning, depends entirely on your having done this small, unglamorous thing correctly and without complaint. You add a second log larger than the first and set the kettle of water on its iron hook to swing slowly over the growing flame. While it warms, you allow yourself, at last, the very small luxury of light. A tallow candle, kept always ready on the corner of the counter nearest the hearth, catches from a splinter of burning kindling, and its low yellow glow spreads out across the room, catching first on the nearest jars, then reaching further until the whole long wall of shelves begins to reveal itself out of the dark. Row upon row of glazed and stoppered vessels, each one holding something you gathered, dried, and stored with your own hands sometime in the warmer months, now half a year behind you. In the deep of winter, this wall of jars is the entire wealth of the shop. There is no fresh harvest to draw upon now, no morning walk to the garden's edge for whatever the season happens to offer. There is only what was saved, what was dried carefully in late summer and early autumn, tied in small bundles or ground fine and sealed against the damp, waiting patiently through the cold months for exactly this moment, when someone with a cough or an ache or a chilblain comes through the door needing what only careful foresight could provide. You allow yourself, in this quiet hour before the shop opens, a slow walk along that wall with the candle held up before you. It is one of the private pleasures of winter, this morning's survey, done by no one but yourself, for no other reason than to know exactly what you have and exactly how the season's store is holding. Here is the elderberry, dark and dense in its jar, gathered from the hedgerow at the edge of town back, when the light was still long and gold in the evenings. Here is the dried hyssop, its small grey-green leaves crumbling faintly at the edges from months of careful keeping. Here is the horehound, bitter and grey, the coltsfoot, the mullein leaf soft as felt even now, the licorice root cut into short dark lengths, the dried rosa hips, red gone to a deep rust colour, saved for their gentle soreness and their reputed strength against the winter's coughs. Further along, the roots. Valerian, its smell unmistakable, even through a stoppered jar, faintly earthy and strange, saved for the nights when sleep will not come easily to a troubled household. Angelica, comfrey, the pale dried slices of marshmallow root that soften so wonderfully in warm water and soothe a raw throat better than almost anything else you know. And at the far end, kept slightly apart because their use requires more care than the rest, the stronger things. Feverfew, meadowsweet, a small, carefully measured store of willow bark, stripped and dried the previous spring, its bitterness a promise of relief for the aching joints and low fevers that always seem to visit more often once the cold truly sets in. You do this walk most mornings, not because anything has changed since yesterday, but because it steadies you. It is a kind of counting, a kind of prayer almost, though you would not call it that aloud. It tells you, before a single customer has crossed your threshold, exactly what the day is capable of offering. A full jar of elderberry means a full jar of comfort for whoever walks in shivering with the first signs of a winter chest cold. A half-empty jar of licorice root means you will need to be careful with it, saving the last of it for whoever needs it most, rather than whoever asks first. By the time you have finished your slow circuit of the shelves, the kettle has begun to sing faintly over the fire, and the first grey suggestion of morning has started to show itself around the edges of the shuttered window. Not light exactly, but the promise that light is somewhere on its way, however slowly, however reluctantly, on a morning this deep into the cold season. You take a moment, before anything else begins, to warm your own hands properly at the fire, turning them slowly, feeling the ache of the cold night finally begin to loosen from your fingers and knuckles. It is a small selfish comfort, and you allow it to yourself without guilt. A shop cannot be run well by hands too stiff and cold to measure a dose correctly, to grind a root fine enough to stopper a jar without dropping it. The fire is not only for the customers who will come through the door later this morning. It is, first, for you. Outside, beyond the barred shutters, the town is still almost entirely asleep. Somewhere a dog barks once, briefly, and falls silent again. Somewhere further off, a shutter creaks in the wind and is still. The snow that fell in the night has not yet been disturbed by a single footstep, and it lies smooth and blue-grey in what little light there is, softening every rooftop and sill and cart track into the same gentle, rounded shape. It is, you have always thought, one of the quietest hours of the whole year. Not the hush of a summer dawn, which carries birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle even in its stillness, but a deeper, more complete quiet, the kind that only a hard winter night can leave behind it. You sit for a little while longer beside your fire, waiting for the kettle, watching the flames settle into their steady, even burn, and you let yourself simply be here, in this one small warm room, at this one still hour, before the long working day of a medieval winter properly begins. The kettle sings properly at last, a thin rising note that tells you the water is ready, and you lift it carefully from its hook with a folded cloth, setting it to one side of the hearthstone where it will stay warm without boiling itself dry, while you turn to the rest of the morning's work. There is a rhythm to opening a shop in winter that never quite exists in the warmer months, a set order of small tasks that you have long since stopped needing to think through, one that simply carries your hands from one thing to the next while your mind is free to wander wherever it likes. You cross to the shutters next, the great wooden panels that have kept the worst of the night's cold from the front room, and you draw back the iron bar that holds them fast. The wood is cold enough to sting your palm even through your sleeve, and for a moment, before you push them open, you simply stand there and brace yourself for what the light and the air outside will show you. Then you push, and the shutters swing outward with a low groan of old hinges, and the grey morning comes flooding gently in. It is not a bright morning. It will not be a bright day at all, not this deep into winter, when the sun rises so low and so late that it barely seems to clear the rooftops opposite, before it begins its slow climb back down again. But there is light now, pale and soft and faintly blue, the particular color that only snow can lend to a winter morning, bouncing up from every rooftop and windowsill and cart rut in the street outside. You stand in the open doorway for a moment, letting the cold air reach your face, and you look out at a street utterly transformed by the night's fall. The snow lies deep and unbroken along the length of it, softening the hard edges of the buildings opposite into gentle white mounds, filling the gaps between the cobblestones so completely that the street itself seems to have become one smooth, pale surface, unmarked by any footprint or wheel track. A little way off, smoke rises straight and thin from a handful of chimneys, the only sign this early that anyone else in the town is awake at all. The baker, almost certainly, whose ovens must be lit hours before dawn regardless of the season. Perhaps the smith, though his forge fire tends to come later, once there is enough daylight to work by. For now, it is only you and the baker and the cold, patient street between you. You breathe it in, that particular smell of a winter morning after fresh snow, clean and sharp and faintly metallic, cutting straight through the softer smells of wood smoke and baking bread that drift toward you from further along the street. It is, in its way, a beautiful morning, though beautiful is not a word you would have used as a much younger apprentice, back when a morning like this only ever meant more work, more cold hands, more customers arriving stamping snow from their boots and demanding to know why the fire in your shop was not yet warm enough to satisfy them. Age, and enough winters behind you, have a way of turning even hard mornings into something closer to gratitude. You are warm. You have a fire, a full larder, and a full wall of dried herbs behind you. Not everyone in this town, on a morning this cold, can say the same. You do not leave the shutters wide for long. The cold would take back everything the fire has worked all morning to build. So you set the front door itself only partly open, propped with a worn wooden wedge kept exactly for this purpose. Enough to let a little daylight and a little fresh air into the front room without inviting the full force of the winter in after it. Later, once there is a customer at the door, you will open it properly, greet them, and close it again quickly behind them, the way anyone sensible does in a town this cold in the deepest part of the year. With the shop now technically open, though no one will likely come for some while yet, you turn your attention to the counter itself. It is a long, worn slab of oak, its surface pale and smooth from years of grinding, measuring, and wiping clean. And this morning, as every morning, it wants a proper going over before the day's work begins on it in earnest. You take a cloth, dampen it slightly from the warmed kettle water, and wipe the whole length of it down, clearing away the fine dust of yesterday's work. A little spilled flower of dried chamomile here, a faint smear of beeswax there. It is not glamorous work, but it matters. A careless apothecary, your own master used to say, is a dangerous one, and a clean counter is where carefulness begins. While you work, your eyes drift, as they often do at this hour, to the small window set into the front wall beside the door. Its thick, uneven glass panes turned faintly green in the early light. Frost has crept up from the bottom of each pane overnight in delicate, branching patterns, fine as lace, catching what little sun there is and throwing small fractured points of light across the counter and the floor. You have seen this particular kind of frost pattern every winter of your working life, and it has never once failed to catch your attention for a moment, however briefly, however busy the morning ahead promises to be. There is something in it that reminds you, oddly, of the herbs themselves. The same slow, patient, branching growth, the same quiet insistence on forming exactly the shape it was always going to form, given time enough and cold enough and stillness enough to do it in. You allow yourself exactly one such moment of quiet attention each morning, no more, because there is a great deal still to be done before the shop can properly be called ready, and the morning, however slow it feels in this grey light, will not wait for you. Behind you, the fire has settled into a good, steady burn, throwing real warmth now across the whole front room, chasing the worst of the night's chill back into the corners where it will linger, stubborn but manageable, until well past midday. You add one more log, judging the size carefully, enough to keep the fire generous through the first hours of trade without needing constant attention, and you turn, at last, to the real work of the morning. The winter chest. Every apothecary shop keeps what is sometimes called the winter chest, though it is not always a chest at all. In your shop it is simply the lower half of the shelf behind the counter, 3 deep drawers of dark oak, each one worn smooth around its iron ring pull by years of daily use, holding between them everything you are most likely to reach for between the first hard frost of autumn and the last stubborn cold snap of early spring. You kneel before it now, candle set carefully to one side, and slide the top drawer open on its familiar, slightly sticking runner. This first drawer belongs to the chest and the throat, which is to say, to coughs. Winter is, more than anything else, the season of coughs, and you have long since stopped being surprised by how many different kinds of cough walk through your door between the first frost and the thaw. There is the dry, tight cough of a cold caught from a draughty church or a poorly heated hall, and there is the deep, rattling cough of something settled properly in the chest, the kind that keeps a household awake 3 nights running and worries even the calmest of mothers. There is the child's cough, sharp and barking, and the old man's cough, low and persistent, worn into a kind of permanent winter companion by enough hard seasons. For the first, the ordinary tight cough, you reach most often for horehound. It's grey, felted leaves steeped into a bitter syrup with honey, taken by the spoonful to ease the throat and loosen what has settled there. For the deeper, more troubling cough, you turn to coltsfoot and mullein together, their soft leaves gentle enough even for a child's chest, brewed slow into a tea that soothes as much as it treats. And always, behind and beneath every remedy in this drawer, there is honey itself, warmed and mixed with a little vinegar into what the old recipe books call an oxymel, sharp and sweet together, coating a raw throat the way little else quite manages to. You lift out a small stoppered jar of the horehound syrup, made in late autumn, when the last of the plant was cut and dried, and hold it a moment to the candlelight, checking its color, its thickness, the way it moves slowly along the inside of the glass when you tilt it. Satisfied, you set it on the counter above, within easy reach, because you already know, without needing any particular gift for prophecy, that before this day is through, at least one shivering, coughing customer will stand at your door wanting exactly this. The second drawer holds what you think of, privately, as the drawer of aching bones and low winter fevers. Willow bark rests here, cut and dried the previous spring when the young branches were easiest to strip. Its pale inner bark carefully separated from the rougher outer layer and dried flat, so it will keep its strength through the long months of storage. Steeped slowly in warm water, it makes a bitter draught that eases the aching joints so many of your older customers complain of once the true cold arrives. The kind of deep ache that seems to live in the bone itself and worsens with every degree the frost sets in. Beside it sits feverfew, small and dried, and slightly dusty looking, saved for the low fevers that so often accompany a winter cold, and meadowsweet, sweet smelling even now, gathered from the damp meadow at the river's edge back in high summer, useful for much the same purpose. You do not reach for these as often or as lightly as for the cough remedies in the drawer above. Fever and deep ache require a more careful hand, a proper conversation with whoever is suffering, some sense of how bad the illness truly is before you measure out a dose. Your master taught you this early and firmly, back when you were young enough to think every remedy could simply be handed across a counter without a second thought. Willow bark eases pain, he told you more than once, but it does not replace watching a person carefully, asking the right questions, knowing when a case is beyond what your drawer of dried roots can properly manage. You have carried that lesson with you through every winter since. The third and lowest drawer is smaller than the other two, and it holds what might be the most purely wintry remedies of the whole chest. The things that exist for no reason except that the cold itself, directly and without any illness attached to it at all, can hurt a person. Here are the makings of your Chilblains salve, kept ready in small clay pots, a thick, dark mixture of tallow, beeswax, and crushed comfrey root, worked slow over the fire until it binds into something you can spread easily across cracked, swollen fingers and toes. Beside the salve pots sit small folded packets of dried mustard seed, ground fine, kept for the poultices you sometimes make for the worst cases, when simple salve is not warming enough and something sharper is needed to bring blood properly back into a frostbitten hand or foot. Chilblains are, in truth, one of the most common complaints of the whole season, more common by far than any fever or serious chest complaint, because Chilblains ask so little of misfortune to occur. A pair of thin boots. A morning spent standing too long at a well drawing water with bare, wet hands. A walk home from church or market in boots not properly dried from the day before. By midwinter, half the town seems to be nursing some small, itching, painful patch of red and purple skin along a finger or a toe, and your Chilblain salve, simple as it is, becomes one of the most steadily requested remedies of the whole cold season. You lift one of the small clay salve pots now, checking its level, its texture, whether it has kept well since it was made a few weeks past, and you find it good. Soft enough to spread easily, but firm enough to hold its shape in the pot, rather than running thin and useless. You set 2 of the pots up on the counter, beside the horehound syrup, ready. You have learned, over enough winters, exactly which remedies will be wanted first on a morning this cold, and you like, whenever you can manage it, to have them already close at hand, before the first knock comes at your door. Behind these 3 drawers, tucked at the very back, where the light barely reaches even by candle, sit the makings of the warming cordials, the ones that are perhaps less strictly medicine and more simple comfort, though in a winter this hard, the line between the 2 grows thinner than any physician's manual would care to admit. Dried ginger root, cinnamon bark, whole, saved carefully because it comes from far away and costs more than almost anything else in the shop. A small store of cloves. These will come out later, when you turn to the morning's real work of brewing. But for now you simply note that they are there, waiting their turn. The way everything in this chest waits its turn, patient as the herbs themselves ever are. You close the drawers gently, one after the other, and rise from your knees with the particular stiffness of someone who has knelt too long on a cold stone floor, rubbing warmth back into your knees before you turn once more toward the fire. The winter chest is ready. The counter above it is beginning to fill with exactly the remedies the coming day will most likely ask for. And somewhere outside, beyond the half-open door, the first sounds of a waking town have begun, very faintly, to reach you through the cold, still air. Before the shop truly opens, there is one more task you set yourself each winter morning, and it is, if you are honest, the one you enjoy most of all. Brewing the day's cordial. Not a remedy exactly, though it shares a shelf with them, and often does as much good as anything measured more carefully from the drawers below, but something closer to a small daily kindness, offered to whoever needs warming through on a morning too cold for comfort. You reach first for the jar of elderberries, thick and dark, and faintly sweet-smelling, even through the glass, the same jar you passed your candle over earlier in your morning survey of the shelves. Elderberries were gathered in early autumn, when the hedgerows along the edge of town hung heavy with their small black clusters, and you and your apprentice spent the better part of 2 long afternoons stripping them carefully from their stems, filling basket after basket. Your fingers stained a deep purple that took the better part of a week to properly fade. It was warm work then, sun on your back, the last of the summer still lingering in the air. It seems, this morning, almost impossible to believe that the same fruit now sits here, dark and dried, in a shop with frost creeping up the inside of its windows. You measure out a generous handful into the small iron pot, kept always beside the hearth for exactly this purpose, and you add water from the kettle, still pleasantly warm though, no longer properly hot, and set the pot to swing gently over the fire on its own smaller hook. While it begins its slow warming, you turn to the spices kept at the back of the winter chest and select, with the same careful attention you give to any remedy, a short length of cinnamon bark, 2 whole cloves, and a small sliver of dried ginger root, no more, because these things are costly and must be used with restraint, however much a colder morning might tempt you toward generosity. The elderberries themselves need very little from you now, beyond patience. You crush them gently against the side of the pot with the back of a wooden spoon as they soften in the warming water, releasing their dark juice slowly into the mixture, and you add the spices and a generous spoonful of honey from the crock, kept always near the hearth, where the warmth keeps it soft and easy to measure. Honey in winter, kept anywhere colder, sets hard and stubborn as stone, and half the trick of a well-run winter kitchen or shop is simply knowing to keep your honey somewhere the cold cannot reach it. You let the cordial simmer slow and low, never quite boiling, because a hard boil, your master always warned you, burns away exactly the gentleness you are trying to capture. This is not medicine made in haste. It is medicine made the way most good things in this shop are made, slowly, with attention, over the better part of an hour, while you turn to whatever other small tasks the morning still requires of you, checking back every little while to stir, to taste, to judge whether it wants another spoonful of honey, or perhaps a little more water to stretch it further across a colder, busier day. While the cordial works its slow way toward readiness, you allow your thoughts to wander a little, the way they often do during this particular stretch of the morning, back toward the season now safely behind you, and forward toward the season still to come. It is a strange, suspended kind of feeling, the deep middle of winter. Neither the bright promise of a new year nor the slow easing towards spring, but simply itself, a long, quiet stretch of cold to be lived through carefully, day by patient day. Your master used to say that winter was the season that told you, more honestly than any other, exactly how well you had prepared. A poor harvest of herbs in summer meant a thin, worried winter chest. A careless autumn, spent enjoying the last of the warm weather, rather than drying and storing properly, meant empty jars by candlemas and customers turned away, with nothing but sympathy to offer them. You have tried, every year of your working life, to be the kind of apothecary whose winter chest never runs thin before the thaw, and most years you manage it. The cordial, by now, has taken on the deep, rich color you are looking for, a dark ruby red, thick enough to coat the back of your wooden spoon when you lift it to check, and the whole front room of the shop has begun to fill with its warm, spiced smell, elderberry and cinnamon and clove all mingling together with the honey and the wood smoke already present from the fire. It is, you think, exactly the smell a winter morning ought to have. You strain the finished cordial carefully through a clean linen cloth into a waiting jug, pressing the last of the liquid gently from the softened berries, and you set the jug near the hearth, close enough to stay warm through the morning without any danger of scorching. A small cup of it, still warm, you pour for yourself before anything else, and you drink it slowly, standing at your own counter in your own quiet shop, feeling the warmth of it spread from your chest outward, chasing the last of the night's cold from wherever it still lingers in you. It is one of the small private comforts of this trade. This first cup of the morning's cordial, taken alone, before the day's real work of tending to other people's coughs and chilblains and low winter fevers has properly begun. You have earned it, you think, with your dark early rising, your careful tending of the fire, your slow patient walk along the shelves. A quiet cup in a quiet shop on a cold winter morning before the first knock comes at the door. You are just setting the empty cup aside, rinsing it quickly in a little of the warmed water, when you hear it at last, faint but unmistakable, footsteps in the snow outside, and then, a moment later, the soft, hesitant knock of someone who has walked some distance in the cold and is glad, you can tell even through a closed door, to have finally arrived somewhere warm. You open the door properly now, letting in a brief, sharp gust of cold air along with your visitor, and close it again quickly behind her. It is an older woman, well known to you, wrapped in a heavy woolen shawl over a coat already thick with wear, her cheeks reddened by the walk and her breath still showing faintly in the air of the shop before the warmth has fully claimed her. She holds one hand curled protectively against her chest, and you know, before she has even properly greeted you, exactly what has brought her out on a morning this cold. "Good morning to you," you say, drawing a low stool close to the hearth for her, and she settles onto it gratefully, letting out a long breath that seems to carry half the walk's discomfort with it. She has come, as you guessed, about her hands. The chilblains that trouble her every winter, without fail, have returned. Worse this year than last, she tells you, holding out fingers reddened and slightly swollen along the knuckles, tender enough that she winces faintly when you take her hand gently in yours to look more closely. It is an old complaint of hers, one you have treated every winter for longer than either of you cares to count. And there is a kind of quiet comfort in that familiarity, in the way she trusts your hands without hesitation, in the way you already know, without needing to be told twice, exactly what she will need. You reach for one of the small clay pots of chilblain salve you set out earlier, and you show her, as you always do, though she surely remembers by now, exactly how much to use and how gently to work it in. Warm the fingers first near the fire, never plunged suddenly into hot water, which does more harm than good to skin already strained by cold. Then a small amount of the salve, worked in slowly with gentle pressure, morning and night, and patience, always patience, because chilblains, like most things this trade teaches you to treat, do not resolve themselves overnight, no matter how much either of you might wish they would. She thanks you, tucking the small pot carefully into the deep pocket of her coat, and lingers a moment longer by the fire before she must brave the cold again. And you do not rush her. There is no other customer waiting yet, and a few minutes of warmth costs you nothing, while it may cost her a great deal to step back out into the frozen street too soon. You talk a little, of nothing in particular, of the depth of the snow, of a neighbor's roof that gave way under its weight last winter, of the price of firewood this year compared to last, the small, easy conversation of two people who have known each other across many winters and many small ailments. And when she finally rises to leave, wrapping her shawl more tightly around herself, you press a small extra measure of dried elderberry into her hand as well, unasked, because you have always thought a cough caught early is easier managed than one left to settle, and because, in truth, you are simply fond of her, and it costs you very little to be generous on a cold morning. She has barely gone, the door still holding its last echo of cold air, when the next visitor arrives, and this one comes with rather more urgency in her step. A young mother, her own shawl thrown hastily over her shoulders, a small child bundled thickly in her arms, both of them arriving in a small flurry of stamped snow and worried breath. The child, no more than 4 or 5 years old, is coughing, a sharp, barking sound that catches at your attention immediately, though you keep your own face calm and steady, because a worried mother needs calm more than she needs to see her own fear mirrored back at her. You draw them both close to the fire at once, settling the child onto your own low stool, while the mother explains, in the quick, half-tumbling way of someone who has been awake worrying most of the night, that the cough began 2 days ago, worse each night, and that the child slept poorly and woke this morning flushed and tired. You listen carefully, watching the child as much as listening to the mother, noting the color in the small face, the rhythm of the breathing beneath the cough, the way the child, though clearly unwell, is alert enough to look curiously around your shop at the rows of jars and the low fire rather than lying limp and listless in her mother's arms. This, you have learned across many winters, tells you a great deal. A sick child who still has curiosity left in them is usually, though not always, a child whose illness has not yet turned truly dangerous. You reach for the colt's foot and mullein tea, rather than the sharper horehound syrup, gentler on a small chest, and you show the mother exactly how to prepare it. A small pinch steeped slow in warm water, never boiling, and sweetened with a little honey to make it easier for a reluctant child to take. You add, too, a small measure of the elderberry cordial still warm near the hearth. A spoonful given warm before bed, you tell her, for comfort as much as cure, and you find yourself, without quite meaning to, warming a small cup of it now, offering it directly to the child, who takes it with the particular solemn seriousness small children often bring to being handed something warm by an adult they do not entirely know. The mother watches with visible relief as her child drinks slowly, coughs once, and then settles, for the first time that morning it seems, into something closer to comfort than distress. You speak with her a little longer, gently, about keeping the child warm, about the value of rest, about watching for any worsening, any real difficulty breathing, any fever that climbs rather than settles. The signs that would mean this had become something beyond what your shelf of dried herbs could properly manage. She nods, listening carefully. The particular careful listening of a mother who wants very much to be told her child will be well, and is trying hard to hear the whole of what you are saying rather than only the parts that comfort her. You do not tell her everything will certainly be fine, because you cannot know that, not truly, not with any illness, however ordinary it seems this morning. But you tell her what you can honestly tell her, that this looks, so far, like an ordinary winter cough, the kind you have seen and treated many times before, and that the remedies you have given her have eased many such coughs before this one. It is, you have found over many years in this trade, usually enough, not false certainty, which helps no one and fails everyone eventually, but honest, careful reassurance, offered alongside something practical to actually do. She leaves with her child a little later, both of them wrapped warmly again against the cold, the small face pink, now with warmth rather than fever. And you watch them go from your doorway for a moment before the cold drives you back inside, and you close the door once more against it. The fire has burned low again while you tended to your visitors, and you add another log before turning back to whatever the rest of this long, grey morning still has waiting for you. With the fire built back up, and no one else waiting at your door for the moment, you turn to the quieter, steadier work that fills the greater part of every winter morning, between one customer and the next: grinding, measuring, refilling the small working jars kept along the front of the counter from the larger stores kept further back, so that whatever comes next, whoever walks through your door, with whatever complaint the cold has given them, you will have exactly what you need already close to hand, rather than having to search and dig through drawers while someone shivers and waits. You draw the heavy stone mortar toward you, cold under your palms even after a morning spent so close to the fire, and you set it on the worn patch of counter kept clear exactly for this purpose. It is old, this mortar, older than you, its inner bowl worn smooth and slightly hollowed by generations of grinding before your own hands ever touched it. Your master used it before you, and his master before him, and you sometimes wonder, in idle moments like this one, how many winters this same stone bowl has helped see a town through, how many coughs and fevers and aching joints have been eased, in part, by whatever was ground within it. The cold, you notice again as you begin, has a particular effect on this kind of work that the warmer months never quite prepare you for. Your fingers, however carefully warmed at the fire beforehand, stiffen quickly once they are set to a task that requires this much fine, careful movement, and grinding dried root or bark to a proper fine powder is not work that forgives clumsy, half-numbed hands. You have learned, across enough winters, to pause more often than you might in summer, to set the pestle down every little while and flex your fingers, rub your palms together, hold them a moment near the fire before returning to your work. It slows you, this necessary care, but there is no real alternative to it. A powder ground carelessly, with joints too stiff to judge the proper texture, is a powder measured wrongly later, and a wrongly measured remedy helps no one. This morning you begin with the willow bark, the dried strips lifted carefully from their drawer in the winter chest, and you break them first into smaller pieces with your hands before setting the pestle to them properly. The bark resists at first, tough and fibrous even in its dried state, and you work it slowly, turning the pestle in steady, patient circles rather than forcing it, letting the stone do the work rather than your own strength. Little by little, the rough pieces give way to a coarser grind, and then, with continued patient turning, to something closer to the fine powder you are aiming for, pale brown, faintly bitter smelling, even before it is prepared into anything. You think, while you work, of the particular kind of patience this trade has taught you, a patience that has nothing at all to do with waiting quietly for something to happen, and everything to do with steady, unhurried repetition of a task until it is properly, thoroughly done. Grinding a root to a fine enough powder cannot be rushed by wanting it finished sooner. Steeping a tincture to its proper strength cannot be hurried by impatience. Even the fire, banked each night to survive until morning, asks nothing of you except that you tend it correctly, and then trust it to do, slowly and on its own schedule, exactly what fire does. It is a lesson, you have often thought, that the herbs themselves teach more thoroughly than any master ever quite managed to in words alone. Patience the herb teaches us, more than any lecture could. You set the finished willow bark powder into a small jar, seal it, and move on to the feverfew, dried and brittle enough now that it crumbles almost on its own between your fingers, before you have even properly begun grinding it, needing only a light touch of the pestle to finish the work. This one goes quickly, and you find yourself glad of the brief respite for your hands before you turn to the next task, refilling the smaller working jar of dried chamomile flowers from the larger stock kept on the higher shelf, a task requiring no grinding at all, only careful, gentle handling, since chamomile flowers, dried, are fragile things, easily crushed to dust if handled too roughly, and dust, however fragrant, does not steep nearly so well as a whole dried flower head. Somewhere in the middle of this quiet, steady stretch of work, you become aware of the particular sounds of a town slowly, reluctantly waking up around you, muffled and softened by the thick blanket of snow, but unmistakable now if you pause to listen. A cart, somewhere not too far off, moving slowly, its wheels crunching through packed snow, rather than rolling freely as they would on a clearer road. Voices faint. Two neighbors perhaps exchanging some brief greeting before hurrying on toward whatever errand the cold morning demands of them. The distant, rhythmic ring of the smith's hammer, finally begun for the day, carrying oddly clear and sharp through the cold, still air in a way sound rarely travels in the warmer, busier months. You allow yourself to notice all of this without stopping your work, your hands continuing their steady, familiar rhythm of grinding and measuring and sealing while your attention drifts gently between the task in front of you and the quiet life of the town beyond your walls. This is, you have come to understand across many winters now, one of the particular pleasures of this trade in this season. In summer, the shop is often full, customers coming and going in a near constant stream. The door barely settled shut before it opens again, and there is little time for this kind of unhurried, half-attentive work. Winter slows everything, the town and the shop both, and while it brings its own hardships, the cold, the shorter days, the particular worry of a fever that might turn serious before help can properly reach it, it also brings this long, quiet stretches of steady, patient work, punctuated rather than dominated by the needs of whoever happens to walk through your door. You finish the chamomile, seal the jar, and set it back in its place along the front of the counter, and you allow your hands, finally, a proper rest, holding them out toward the fire once more, feeling the stiffness ease slowly from your knuckles as the flames throw their steady warmth across the front room of the shop. By the time the light through your small, frosted window has climbed to whatever brightness it will manage today, it is already, in the deepest part of winter, closer to midday than morning, and you have learned across many winters not to expect very much more from the sun than this. It rises so late and so low at this time of year that it barely seems to clear the rooftops opposite your shop, casting a pale, slanting light across the counter for only a few short hours before it begins. Almost immediately, its slow retreat back toward the horizon again. You have come to think of this brief window, the truest daylight the whole day will offer, as something almost precious, and you make a point, whenever the morning's work allows it, of using it well. You draw your stool close to the window itself, where the light, however thin, falls most directly, and you take up whatever fine, close work has been waiting for a moment like this one. Today it is the mending of a torn ledger page, the careful re-stitching of a binding that has come loose from a winter of frequent handling, and the finer work of trimming new quills for the coming weeks of record-keeping. Your eyes, never quite as sharp by candlelight as they once were, are grateful for even this modest daylight, and you work steadily through it, aware all the while of exactly how limited your supply of it truly is. It occurs to you, as it often does at this particular hour of a winter day, how differently the whole shop is run according to the light available to it. In high summer, the days stretch long and generous, work spilling easily from dawn deep into evening without any need to plan carefully around a scarce resource. In winter, everything narrows. The fine work, the close reading of an old recipe scrawled in faded ink, the careful examination of a wound or a rash that daylight shows far more honestly than any candle ever could. All of it must be gathered into these few precious hours around midday, while whatever can wait for firelight. The grinding, the steeping, the simple conversation with a customer warming themselves by the hearth is pushed toward the darker edges of the day instead. A customer arrives while you are still at your stitching, an older man this time, a carter by trade, his hands roughened and reddened from long hours out in the cold managing his horses and his load. He has come, he tells you, more for advice than remedy, worried about the state of his own fingers after a winter already harder on them than most, the skin cracked and painful across several knuckles in a way that goes beyond ordinary chapping. You set your stitching aside and examine his hands carefully in the good midday light, turning them gently, noting the depth of the cracks, the slight swelling, the places where the skin has clearly been trying, without much success, to heal itself between one cold exposure and the next. This, you tell him, is beyond simple chapping, though not yet anything to be seriously alarmed about, and you explain, as you often must to men whose work keeps them constantly out in weather like this, that the skin needs proper protection as much as proper treatment. You offer him a generous measure of the Chilblains salve, thicker in its comfrey and beeswax than what you gave the older woman earlier, better suited to skin already properly cracked, rather than merely tender, and you talk with him a little about wrapping his hands more thoroughly before he takes up his horse's reins each morning, about not warming frozen fingers too quickly at a fire, however tempting the relief might feel in the moment, since sudden warming after a deep chill does the skin no favors at all. He listens carefully, the particular attentive listening of a working man who has learned, likely through hard experience, to take good advice seriously when it is offered plainly and without unnecessary fuss, and he thanks you, tucking the salve away before lingering a few minutes by your fire the way most winter customers do, unwilling, understandably, to hurry back out into the cold a moment sooner than necessary. You talk briefly of the roads, which he tells you are holding well enough for his cart despite the snow, of a bridge some way outside town that he worries may need repair before the spring thaw brings higher water, the easy, unhurried talk of two people simply glad, for a few minutes, of shared warmth and shared conversation on a cold, quiet day. When he finally goes, you return to your stitching for a little while longer, working steadily while the light holds, aware, as always at this hour, of exactly how quickly it will begin. Before too long, its slow fade back toward evening. There is a particular quality to midday light in the deep of winter that you have never quite managed to put into words, even to yourself. A kind of pale, held stillness, neither the eager brightness of morning nor the gentle, golden softening of a summer evening, but something more subdued, more careful, as though even the light itself understands how sparingly it must be used at this time of year. You finish the stitching at last, the ledger's binding sound again, and set it aside, and you allow yourself, for just a few minutes, to simply sit by the window and look out at the quiet, snow-covered street beyond it, watching the small, ordinary business of a winter town go about itself. A woman crossing carefully with a covered basket. A dog trotting along the cleared center of the street, nose down, following some scent through the packed snow. The baker's boy, delivering a loaf somewhere further along, his breath showing in short, quick clouds as he half runs against the cold. It is, in its own quiet way, a kind of gift, this brief, honest daylight, and you take a slow, unhurried moment to simply receive it before the afternoon's work and the afternoon's fading light begin to draw you onward again. The afternoon, when it properly begins, brings with it a visitor of a different sort than the mornings had, and you know from the first moment you see him crossing your threshold that this one will require a little more of your careful attention than a simple chilblain or a well-settled winter cough. It is a young man, not much more than a boy in truth, sent by his mother from a farmhouse some distance outside the town walls, and he arrives out of breath, his cheeks flushed a color that owes as much, you suspect immediately, to something other than the cold alone. He tells you, between breaths still catching from what must have been a hurried walk through deep snow, that his younger sister has taken a fever, 2 days now, worse each night, and that his mother, unable to leave the child alone to make the journey herself, has sent him instead with as clear a description as she could manage of the symptoms and a request, urgent but not panicked. For whatever you might be able to offer, you draw him close to the fire immediately, both for his own sake, since he is clearly chilled through from his walk, and because a calmer, warmer messenger tends to give a clearer account than one still shivering and gasping in your doorway. You ask your questions carefully, patiently, the way you have learned to across many winters of exactly this kind of visit. How high does the fever seem? Has she taken any food or drink? Is she restless or unusually still? Does she complain of pain anywhere particular? Her head, her chest, her stomach? Has anything been tried already? The boy answers as best he can, clearly repeating, in places, almost exactly what his mother told him to say. And you build, slowly, question by patient question, as clear a picture as you are able of a child you have never seen. In a farmhouse you will not visit yourself, based entirely on the careful, second-hand account of her worried brother. It sounds, from everything he tells you, like an ordinary winter fever, uncomfortable and worrying for a mother watching it unfold, but not, so far as you can judge from his description, anything beyond what careful home nursing and the right remedies ought to be able to manage. No mention of the kind of severe, unrelenting symptoms that would tell you this was something graver. No talk of the child struggling badly for breath. No rash, no confusion, only a fever that comes and goes with the day, worse at night, alongside the ordinary aches and low appetite that so often accompany it. You measure out, with careful attention, a good supply of dried feverfew and meadow sweet together, and alongside it a smaller, more carefully weighed portion of the willow bark, explaining to the boy, slowly and clearly enough that he can repeat it accurately to his mother, exactly how much to use and how often, steeped gently in warm water, never boiling, given by the spoonful rather than forced upon a child who may have little appetite even for a remedy. You add, too, a measure of dried elderflower, gentler still, useful for easing a fever's worst discomfort, even when little else can be kept down. Beyond the remedies themselves, you spend a good few minutes talking him through the simpler things his mother almost certainly already knows, but that bear repeating regardless. Because a frightened household sometimes forgets its own good sense in the middle of a difficult night. Keep the child warm, but not smothered in too many blankets. Offer small sips of water often, even when she does not ask for them herself. Cool cloths, wrung from water kept at room warmth rather than icy from outside, laid gently across the forehead if the fever climbs uncomfortably high. And, most importantly, the thing you always say last, because it is the thing most likely to be forgotten in the worry of a difficult night. If the fever climbs sharply and will not ease, if she grows confused or unusually difficult to wake, if her breathing becomes labored rather than simply quickened, send for help again immediately, day or night. And do not wait until morning out of politeness or reluctance to trouble anyone further. The boy nods seriously at each instruction, and you can see him repeating parts of it under his breath, fixing it in his memory the careful, earnest way that anyone entrusted with an important message for the first time tends to. You wrap the remedies carefully, each one clearly marked, though you know he cannot read, with a small distinguishing mark pressed into the wax seal of each packet, so his mother will be able to tell one from another without confusion. You press a little extra elderberry cordial into his hands as well, warmed one final time before he must brave the walk home, both for the sister's comfort and, quietly, for his own, since a long cold walk home is easier borne with something warm inside a person first. Before he leaves, you find yourself, as you often do in moments like this, weighing the old, familiar question that this trade never quite lets you set down entirely. Whether what you have offered is truly enough, whether you ought instead to insist he wait while you gather your things and make the journey out to the farmhouse yourself, despite the snow, despite the distance, despite the hours it would take away from a shop that others in the town also depend upon this same afternoon. It is a weighing you have done many times before, and you have learned, slowly and not always comfortably, to trust your own careful judgment of a case, rather than let worry alone dictate your response to every fever that walks, or in this case is carried by messenger through your door. This one, you judge, based on everything the boy has told you, is not yet a case that requires your presence, in person, however much you might wish, in some simpler part of yourself, to be certain of that by seeing the child with your own eyes. You tell him instead, clearly, that if anything changes for the worse, if his mother grows more worried, rather than less over the coming hours, He is to come again immediately, any hour, and you will come to the farmhouse yourself without hesitation. He thanks you several times, with the slightly overwhelmed gratitude of someone young enough to still find every kindness remarkable, and steps back out into the cold, Cordial and Remedies wrapped carefully against his chest, and you watch him go from your doorway until the falling snow and the bend in the road finally swallow him from sight. You close the door slowly and stand a moment with your hand still resting against the cold wood, feeling the particular, familiar weight that always follows a visit like this one. Not fear exactly, and not quite worry either, but something adjacent to both, a kind of held attention that will not fully release you until you know, eventually, how the child fares. It is one of the quieter costs of this trade that few outside it ever think to ask about, this carrying, in some small corner of your attention, of every difficult case that walks through your door, even after the remedy has been measured and wrapped and sent on its way. You will think of that farmhouse more than once before this day is through, and likely again tomorrow, until word comes, as it usually does eventually, of how the fever finally broke. For now, though, there is a fire to tend, and other work still waiting, and you turn back toward the counter, adding a fresh log to the flames, and let the steady, ordinary rhythm of the shop slowly settle you again. With the boy's footsteps long since faded into the snow, and no other customer yet at your door, you turn to a task that belongs particularly to this stretch of the winter. The slow, steady work of rendering wax and tallow into fresh salve, replenishing what the season's chilblains and cracked hands have already begun to draw heavily from your stores. It is not delicate work in the way the morning's mortar and pestle grinding was, but it demands a different kind of patience, the patience of watching something melt and combine slowly over gentle heat without ever once rushing it toward a boil. You set a small, heavy pot near the edge of the fire, close enough to draw steady warmth, but not so close that the heat becomes fierce and uneven, and you begin with the beeswax. Cut into rough pieces from a larger block, kept wrapped in cloth at the back of the shop, purchased in autumn from the town's own beekeeper, in exchange for a good measure of remedies traded across the warmer months. The wax softens slowly, then melts, releasing its faint, sweet, honeyed smell into the air of the shop, mingling pleasantly with the last lingering warmth of the morning's elderberry cordial. To the melting wax you add tallow, rendered some weeks earlier from good clean fat set aside for exactly this purpose, and you stir the two together slowly with a long wooden spoon kept always for this task alone, watching carefully as they combine into a smooth, pale, faintly golden liquid. The proportion matters more than a stranger to the trade might guess. Too much wax, and the finished salve sets too hard, difficult to work into cracked, painful skin without causing more discomfort than relief. Too much tallow, and it stays too soft, too quick to melt at the first touch of a warm hand, messy and wasteful before it has done half the good it should. You have learned the balance across many winters of trial, and your hands know it now, almost without needing your careful attention, though you watch closely regardless. Because carelessness in exactly this kind of small, steady task is how good remedies quietly become poor ones. Once the wax and tallow have properly combined, you add the comfrey, dried root ground fine earlier in the season and kept ready in a small jar exactly for this purpose. stirring it steadily into the warm liquid until it is evenly distributed throughout. Comfrey has long been valued. In this shop and in every apothecary's shop you have ever known, for its particular gift of easing broken, cracked and slow healing skin, and it seems to you especially suited to a season that does so much damage to hands and feet and faces left too long exposed to frost and wind. You let the mixture steep a little longer over the gentle heat, drawing out as much of the comfrey's virtue into the wax as patience allows, before finally drawing the pot away from the fire to begin its slow cooling. While it cools, you take up a second, smaller task alongside it, preparing the mustard poultices you reach for in the more severe cases of chilblain or frostbite, when simple salve is not warming enough on its own. You grind the dried mustard seed fine, taking care, as always with this particular herb, to keep your hands well away from your eyes while you work, since mustard's warming strength, so useful when applied properly to cold suffering skin, is considerably less welcome anywhere near a more delicate part of the body. You mix the ground seed with a little warm water and a measure of flour to bind it, forming a paste that you will, when needed, spread thin across a folded cloth rather than directly onto skin, since mustard applied too directly and too long can burn as readily as it warms, another lesson your master impressed upon you early and firmly after. He once admitted with a rueful laugh, learning it rather painfully himself as a young apprentice. You set the finished poultice paste aside in a covered dish to be made fresh again whenever actually needed, rather than stored for any length of time, since its strength fades quickly once mixed, and you return your attention to the cooling wax mixture, testing it now and then with a careful finger, waiting for exactly the moment when it has firmed enough to pour without being so set that it becomes difficult to work with. When that moment comes, you pour the pale, fragrant mixture carefully into a row of small clean clay pots kept ready exactly for this purpose, filling each one with practiced, steady hands, and you set them aside on the cool stone of the far windowsill to finish setting properly, safely away from the direct heat of the fire. It is satisfying work, in its own quiet way, the kind of task that leaves something tangible behind it, a row of small filled pots where before there was only wax and tallow, and a handful of dried root. You count them as you set them out. 6 new pots of Chilblains salve, more than enough to see the shop through the coming week, even at the season's usual steady demand for it. And you feel something close to the same small satisfaction you felt this morning, finding the fire's banked coals still glowing beneath their ash. A task seen properly through from beginning to end, on a day when so much else, the fevers, the coughs, the worried mothers and worried sons, remains necessarily uncertain until it resolves itself one way or another. While the pots finish setting, you allow yourself a short pause, drawing your stool once more toward the fire and taking, at last, a proper midday meal. Simple bread and a wedge of hard cheese kept in the small cold larder at the back of the shop, and a cup of the elderberry cordial, warmed one more time to accompany it. You eat slowly, without any particular hurry, watching the fire, listening to the settled quiet of the shop around you, the particular hush of a winter afternoon when the brief daylight has already begun, almost imperceptibly, its slow retreat back toward evening. It occurs to you, as it often does during exactly this kind of quiet pause, How much of this trade is built not from any single dramatic remedy or clever cure, but from precisely this: small, steady, unglamorous tasks, performed carefully and repeated faithfully, season after season, year after year, so that whatever the coming days ask of you, a chilblain, a cough, a fever carried in by an anxious messenger through the snow, you have already, quietly and in advance, prepared something useful to offer. It is not a trade that rewards impatience, and it never has been. Not in all the years you have practiced it, and not, you suspect, in all the many years before you that others practiced it in shops much like this one. You finish your simple meal, brush the last of the bread crumbs from your hands, and rise to check on the salve pots one final time, finding them set now firm and smooth, ready to be labeled and shelved among the rest of the winter chest's steady, reliable store. The pots labeled and shelved, you turn next to a task that belongs more to the shop's slower rhythms than to any single day's demands, though winter afternoons, quiet as they often are, have always seemed to you the natural time to attend to it. You reach beneath the counter for the Almanac, a slim, much-handled little book bound in worn leather, its pages soft and faintly grey at the edges from years of turning by candlelight and by careful daylight both. It was your master's before it was yours, added to across many years in a slowly shifting mixture of hands, his own careful, upright script giving way, partway through, to your own, still faintly recognizable as an apprentice's hand in its earliest pages before it settled, gradually, into the steadier writing you keep now. You open it to the section given over to the winter months, and you read again, though you have read it many times before, the old familiar observations gathered there across years of careful watching. The particular color a sunset takes when frost is likely to follow hard behind it, a deep, bruised orange rather than the softer rose of a merely cold but frostless evening. The way smoke behaves rising from a chimney, climbing straight and thin in settled, colder weather, but bending and scattering low when a change of weather, usually milder but sometimes worse, is not far off. The particular restlessness certain animals show before a heavy snowfall, noted here in your master's own hand from some winter decades past, a farmer's cattle grown unusually eager to return early to shelter, a flock of birds gathering low and dense along a hedgerow, rather than scattered wide across open field. You have never entirely known how much to trust such signs, and neither, you suspect, did your master, whose own notes are sprinkled here and there with small, honest doubts alongside his careful observations. A question mark beside one entry, a note reading proved wrong, this year at least, beside another. But you have kept the habit regardless, this slow winter reading of the Almanac, because even where the signs themselves prove unreliable, the discipline of watching closely, of noticing the sky and the smoke, and the restless cattle, has served you well across many winters in ways less easily written down. An apothecary who watches the world closely tends, you have found, to watch their patients closely too. And the two habits, weather reading and healing, have always seemed to you more closely related than most people outside this trade would guess. You take up your own quill, its nib freshly trimmed from this morning's midday work by the window, and add a small note of your own beside today's date, the particular deep, held stillness of the morning sky, the way the smoke from your own chimney has risen straight and thin all day without once bending, your own private guess, based on years of careful watching. That the cold will hold steady rather than worsen through the coming night, though you note it, as your master always taught you to, with appropriate humility, a small guess rather than a certain claim. Beyond the weather signs, the Almanac holds other winter wisdom too, gathered slowly across years and carefully preserved for exactly this quiet, unhurried hour of a winter afternoon, when there is time enough to properly consult it. Notes on which of your dried stores tend to weaken fastest across a long winter, and which hold their strength longest. Knowledge that shapes, more than almost anything else, how carefully you must ration certain remedies against certain others as the season wears on. Willow bark, you read again in your master's careful hand, loses little of its bitter strength even by late winter, kept dry and cool. Chamomile flower, by contrast, fades noticeably by Candlemas, if not used generously before then, its gentle virtue thinning month by month, in a way the sturdier roots and barks around it do not. You cross-reference this against your own morning survey of the shelves, the mental accounting you took earlier while walking the wall of jars by candlelight, and you make a small note to yourself, practical rather than poetic this time, that the chamomile ought to be offered a little more freely over the coming weeks, rather than saved too carefully, since its strength will only fade regardless of how sparingly you use it, and a remedy saved past its usefulness helps no one at all. It is a small, practical piece of housekeeping, but it matters. This kind of careful attention to what you actually have and how quickly it changes, and it is exactly the sort of quiet, unglamorous foresight that separates, across enough winters, a shop that runs dry and worried by the season's end from one that carries its town steadily through to the thaw. You linger a little longer over the Almanac's older pages, the ones filled entirely in your master's hand, from winters now decades past, before you yourself ever stood behind this counter. There is something quietly companionable in reading them. On an afternoon like this one, snow still falling steadily beyond your window, a fire burning low but steady at your back. He is long gone now, your master, some years buried in the churchyard at the edge of town, but his careful observations remain here, in this small worn book, still faithfully guiding the shop he built, and that you now, in your turn, keep running through each winter much as he once did. You wonder, sometimes, on quiet afternoons like this one, whether some future apprentice of your own will one day sit exactly where you are sitting now, reading your own careful notes alongside his, learning the same slow patience from the same small, well-kept book. It is a gentle thought rather than a sad one, and you allow yourself to sit with it a little while, the almanac still open on your knee, the fire crackling low and steady beside you, before the practical demands of the afternoon draw your attention back toward the shop itself. You note, glancing again at the small, careful entries your master left behind, that he too seemed to favor exactly this stretch of a winter afternoon for this particular task, the almanac's pages showing, here and there, a small ink smudge or a slightly hurried final line, as though he too had heard, at some point in his own careful reading, the sound of an approaching customer, and set his quill aside rather more quickly than he might otherwise have liked. You close the book gently, at last, and return it to its place beneath the counter, ready again for whatever tomorrow's reading might add to it. and you rise to check the fire once more, adding a careful measure of wood, judging by the fading light through your small window that the afternoon, brief as it always is at this time of year, has already begun its own slow turn toward evening. The snow, which had eased somewhat through the middle part of the day, begins again in the early afternoon, and you notice it first not by looking out at the street, but by the particular hush that settles over the shop the moment it starts, a deepening of the already quiet winter silence that you have come to recognize across enough years of watching it happen. You set aside whatever you are doing for a moment and cross to the window, wiping a small clear patch in the condensation gathered along the inside of the glass, and you watch the snow fall for a little while, slow and steady, each flake drifting down without any particular hurry to join the deep, unbroken white already covering every rooftop and sill and cart track in sight. There is something in a heavy, steady snowfall that has always struck you as close kin to the work you do here in this shop, though you have never quite managed to explain the connection properly to anyone who asked. Perhaps it is only the shared patience of it, the way neither a proper tincture nor a proper snowfall can be rushed toward completion by wanting it finished sooner. Perhaps it is simply the hush both bring with them, the particular quality of stillness that settles over a room, or a street, or a whole town, when something slow and steady and entirely without urgency is quietly, patiently doing exactly what it was always going to do. Whatever the reason, you find yourself, as you often do on afternoons like this one, standing a little longer at the window than the work strictly allows, simply watching the snow fall. The shop stays quiet through this stretch of the afternoon, no customer arriving to interrupt the steady hush of the falling snow, and you use the time well, turning to the slower, more patient tasks that a busier day rarely allows proper room for. You draw out the small copper still kept at the back of the shop, used only occasionally through the winter months, and you set it up carefully near the fire, filling its lower chamber with a generous measure of water and a good handful of dried lavender flower, saved from the previous summer's harvest for exactly this purpose. Distilled lavender water, gentle and pleasant smelling, has a dozen small uses across a shop like yours, soothing a mild headache dabbed cool against the temples, easing a restless child towards sleep, when added in small measure to warm bath water, freshening linen, kept too long in a closed winter chest. It is not urgent work, and it takes the better part of an hour to properly complete. But an hour like this one, quiet and uninterrupted, is exactly the kind of hour such slow, patient work requires. You tend the small fire beneath the still carefully, keeping it low and even rather than fierce, watching the first pale drops of distilled water begin, eventually, to collect slowly in the waiting vessel below, each drop catching the firelight for a brief moment before joining the small, growing pool beneath it. It is quiet, careful work, requiring attention without requiring haste, and you find your thoughts wandering gently while your hands and eyes stay steady at their task, drifting back, as they sometimes do on afternoons like this, toward the summer months that filled the very jars and bundles you are drawing from now. You remember, distantly but clearly, the particular warmth of the morning you gathered this lavender. The field a little way outside the town walls turned entirely purple and humming with bees. The good, clean smell of it filling the whole basket you carried home, your hands stained faintly with its oils by the time the cutting was finished. It seems, on an afternoon like this one, with snow falling steadily beyond your window and frost creeping ever further up the inside of your glass, almost impossible to properly hold both memories at once, the humming purple field and this quiet, snow-hushed shop, and yet here they are, connected directly and completely by nothing more than a small handful of dried flowers steadily giving up the last of their summer warmth into a slowly filling vessel of distilled water. While the still does its own slow, patient work, you turn to a second task alongside it, restocking the smaller, working jars along the front of the counter from your larger stores further back. The same steady housekeeping you began this morning, but return to now with the particular thoroughness that a quiet, uninterrupted afternoon allows. You check each jar carefully as you refill it, noting, much as you did in your morning survey, exactly how the season's stores are holding, and you find yourself, as always at this point in the winter, doing a small private arithmetic in your head. How many weeks remain until the thaw might reasonably be expected? How generously each remedy has been used so far this season? Whether any particular store is running low enough to warrant more careful rationing before spring finally, mercifully, arrives. It is, on the whole, a reassuring accounting. The elderberry holds well, more than enough left to see the shop comfortably through to spring, even at the season's steady demand for cordial and cough remedy both. The willow bark, too, remains generous, its slow use across the winter's aches and low fevers having barely dented the careful store you laid in the previous spring. Only the chamomile, as the Almanac warned you earlier this same afternoon, shows real signs of thinning, and you make a small mental note alongside the written one already added to the Almanac, to offer it more freely, rather than hold it back too carefully against a fading that will happen regardless of how sparingly you use it. The light through your window has grown noticeably dimmer by the time you finish this second round of housekeeping. The brief, precious daylight of the winter afternoon already well into its slow retreat, and the falling snow outside has thickened rather than eased, each flake now visible only as a brief pale flicker against the darkening grey beyond your glass. You check the still one final time, finding the collected lavender water a good, generous measure, enough to see the shop through several weeks of small, gentle uses, and you draw the small fire beneath it down carefully, letting the last of the process finish on its own gentle, dwindling heat. The shop, for this stretch of the afternoon, has settled into exactly the kind of quiet, steady rhythm you have come, across many winters, to treasure most about this particular season of your trade. No urgent knock at the door, no worried messenger arriving breathless from the cold. Only the slow drip of distilled lavender water, the steady crackle of your fire, and the soft, unbroken hush of snow continuing to fall, patient and unhurried, over the whole quiet town beyond your walls. The light fails properly not long after, the way it always does at this point in the winter, not with any dramatic darkening, but with a slow, almost apologetic dimming. The grey of the afternoon deepening by degrees into the deeper grey of early evening, until you can no longer pretend the daylight is worth working by. You set aside the last of your restocking and turn, as you do every evening at this time of year, to the candles. There is a particular ritual to lighting a shop's candles in the deep of winter. One you have performed so many times across so many years that your hands know the order of it, almost without needing your attention at all. You begin with the tallow candle on the counter nearest the hearth, lighting it from the fire itself with a thin splinter of kindling. And from that first flame, you carry the light onward, candle by candle, to the smaller sconces set along the shelves, to the single good beeswax candle kept for the most careful, close work. Its flame steadier and its light cleaner than the tallow, but its cost dear enough that you save it for exactly those tasks that truly need it. Tallow, cheaper and more plentiful, does most of the shop's ordinary evening work. Its light a little smokier, its smell a little more present in the air, but serviceable enough for measuring and pouring, and the ordinary business of an evening's trade. You think, while you work through this familiar ritual, of how much of a household's or a shop's winter economy comes down in the end to exactly this: light and the careful, patient management of how much of it you can afford to keep burning through the long dark stretch between an early dusk and a late dawn. Candles cost money, and tallow candles, cheap as they are compared to beeswax, still add up across a whole winter's worth of evenings. And you have learned, across many years of keeping this shop's accounts, exactly how many candles a careful household needs, and exactly how many a wasteful one burns through without ever quite noticing the difference until the reckoning comes due. The shop, once properly lit, takes on a different character entirely than it holds through the day, the warm, uneven candlelight throwing long, soft shadows across the counter and up along the wall of jars, catching here and there on the curve of a glazed vessel or the worn brass fitting of a drawer pull. You have always found this particular hour, the shop freshly lit against the coming dark, one of the most purely pleasant of the whole working day, a kind of small, private theatre, performed for no audience but yourself. The fire and the candles together, turning an ordinary working room into something closer to warm and golden and briefly, quietly beautiful. It is into this newly lit warmth that your next visitor arrives, an older servant sent down from the manor house that sits a little way outside the town proper, wrapped thickly against the cold, and carrying a small lantern of her own that throws its own modest light alongside your candles as she steps through the door. She has come, she explains, on behalf of the old master of the house, whose joints, always troublesome in the cold months, have grown considerably worse this particular winter, worse than she has seen in several years of service there, leaving him restless and uncomfortable through most nights, despite every effort the household has made to keep him warm and comfortable. You listen carefully as she describes his complaint, an old man's aching in the hips and knees, worse by night, worse still when the weather turns particularly cold and damp before a snowfall, exactly the kind of complaint you have treated in enough elderly patients across enough winters to recognize immediately, though you are careful, as always, to ask your own careful questions rather than assume too quickly that you already know the whole of it. Has he taken any fever alongside the aching? Has the pain settled in one place, or does it move between joints? Does he still walk, however slowly, or has it kept him fully to his bed? Her answers, careful and clearly well informed, a servant of long standing who knows her master's habits and complaints thoroughly. confirm what you had already begun to suspect. An old familiar winter ache, worsened this year by a particularly hard cold season, requiring comfort and steady management rather than any more dramatic intervention. You measure out a generous portion of the willow bark, alongside a smaller measure of meadowsweet to ease it further, and you talk her carefully through the preparation. Steeped slow in warm water and given warm, ideally in the evening, before he settles for the night, so that whatever ease it offers might carry him more comfortably through the worst of the night's aching. You add, too, a suggestion beyond the remedy itself, a warm compress of flannel wrapped around a heated stone, kept close against the worst affected joint through the evening, a simple comfort that costs the household nothing beyond a little care and attention, but that you have seen ease many an elderly patient's night considerably. She thanks you, tucking the remedy carefully into a cloth bag, brought for exactly this purpose, and lingers only briefly by your fire, mindful, you can tell, of a household waiting on her return and a walk back to the manor that grows less pleasant with every passing hour of darkening cold. Before she goes, she mentions, almost as an afterthought, that the master has also asked, given the season, whether you might have anything warming to send along for the whole household's evening comfort. A small kindness he apparently extends most winters to the servants who tend him so faithfully through the difficult months. You smile at this and reach for a good measure of your dried cinnamon and cloves, wrapped carefully together with instructions for a simple mold-spiced posset, warmed milk or ale spiced generously and sweetened with a little honey, the kind of small, warming comfort that costs a household little but does a great deal for morale on a long, cold winter evening. She thanks you again, genuinely pleased, and steps back out into the deepening dark with her lantern held before her. And you watch her small light bob away down the snow-covered street until the darkness and the distance finally take it from your sight. You close the door against the cold that follows her departure and stand a moment in your own candlelit shop, listening to the settled quiet that has fallen properly now over the whole town outside, broken only by the low crackle of your fire and the occasional soft hiss of a candle catching a stray draught. The evening's true work is only just beginning, you know. The ledger still waiting to be brought up to date, supper still to be prepared. But for this one quiet moment, standing alone in the warm, gathered light of your own small shop, you allow yourself simply to appreciate how far the day has come from the cold, dark hour before dawn to this, a shop warm and lit and steadily, faithfully tended through every hour between. You turn, once the shop has settled back into its evening quiet, to the ledger drawn out from its place beneath the counter and opened to the current page, still bearing yesterday's careful entries in your own steady hand. Keeping the accounts properly is not work you have ever particularly loved, if you are honest with yourself. But it is work you have long since learned to respect, and a winter evening, the shop's business largely done for the day, has always seemed to you the natural hour for it. You work through the day's entries methodically, the way you have been taught to since your own earliest years as an apprentice. The Chilblains salve given to the older woman this morning, noted alongside her name and the small, informal credit she carries with you, built up gradually across many years of mutual trust between two people who have known each other a very long time. The coltsfoot and mullein tea given to the coughing child, and the small measure of elderberry cordial pressed unasked into her mother's hands, noted honestly as a gift rather than disguised as a proper sale, because you have never seen much virtue in an apothecary's ledger that pretends to more profit than it honestly earned. The willow bark and feverfew sent home with the anxious young messenger from the farmhouse outside town, and beside it, in the margin, a small private note to yourself. A reminder to ask after the child's recovery whenever word next reaches you from that direction. The candlelight is kind enough for this kind of work, close and careful as it must be, and you find a certain steady satisfaction in it despite yourself. The neat rows of figures and small notes building, day by day and season by season, into the long, careful record of a shop's whole life, a record that will, you sometimes think, likely outlast you. Much as your own master's careful hand still lives on in the almanac you read earlier this same afternoon. You add the final entry, the older servant from the manor house, and her master's aching joints, the spiced posset sent along besides, and you close the ledger at last, satisfied that the day's business, whatever else it has asked of you, has at least been properly and honestly recorded. With the ledger closed, your thoughts turn, as they do most evenings around this hour, towards supper, and you rise from the counter to see what the small kitchen at the back of the shop might offer you tonight. It is simple fare most winter evenings, and tonight is no exception. A thick pottage, kept warm since midday in a pot set near the edge of the kitchen fire, thickened with barley, and whatever root vegetables the cellar still holds this deep into the season. Carrots grown soft and sweet from their months of storage, a good handful of dried peas. A little salted bacon for flavor more than substance. You ladle out a generous bowlful and carry it back to your stool by the front room's hearth, preferring, most winter evenings, the company of your own shop's fire to the smaller, colder kitchen behind it. You eat slowly, the way you have eaten most meals today, without hurry, the pottage warming you thoroughly from the inside in a way that only a proper hot meal on a cold evening quite manages to. Outside, beyond your shuttered window, the snow continues its steady, unhurried fall, and you can hear, very faintly through the thick wood and glass, the particular deep hush that a heavy snowfall lays over a whole sleeping town, muffling every sound that might otherwise carry. The occasional distant bark of a dog, the creak of a shutter somewhere down the street, into something soft and far away, and entirely without urgency. It is while you are finishing this simple supper that the evening's true, particular task arrives, the one you have, in truth, been quietly looking forward to since the afternoon. The making of the household's own warming posset, not for any customer this time, but for yourself, a small private comfort reserved for exactly this hour of a long winter day, when the work is largely finished, and only the quiet, settling stretch of evening remains before sleep properly claims you. You warm a generous measure of milk slowly in a small pot near the fire, never allowing it to properly boil, and while it warms you measure out, with the same careful attention you give any remedy, though this one asks for considerably more indulgence, a good pinch of your precious cinnamon, a single whole clove, a small sliver of the dried ginger root, kept always near the winter chest, and a generous spoonful of honey, softened easily now by the fire's steady warmth. You stir these into the warming milk slowly, watching the spices swirl and settle and release their warm, fragrant scent into the steam rising gently from the pot. And when it has warmed properly through, without ever quite reaching a boil, you pour it carefully into your own favored cup, the one with the small chip along its rim that you have never quite gotten around to replacing. The first sip is, as it always is on an evening like this one, exactly the small, perfect comfort you were hoping for, warm and sweet and gently spiced, spreading its particular winter warmth outward from your chest, the way the morning's cordial did so many hours ago now, though this later cup carries with it a different quality entirely, less the bracing comfort of a cold morning, and more the settled, unhurried comfort of a day well spent, drawing gently now toward its close. You are perhaps a third of the way through your cup, settled comfortably by the fire, listening to the soft crackle of the flames and the faint, muffled hush of the snow still falling steadily beyond your walls, when a knock comes at the door, later and more hesitant than any that has come today, and you rise, setting your cup carefully aside to answer it. It is a traveler this time, a stranger to you. A merchant's man by his dress, and the pack still strapped across his shoulders, caught, it seems, by the day's heavy snowfall somewhere on the road, and forced to seek shelter in the town, rather than press on toward wherever his journey was originally bound. He is chilled through in a way that goes well beyond the ordinary cold of a short walk across town. His hands, when he holds them out toward you, showing the particular pale, waxy look along several fingertips that you recognize immediately, and with a small private concern you are careful not to let show too plainly on your face. You draw him quickly inside, closer to the fire than you would normally seat even the coldest of your regular customers, and you begin at once the careful, patient work that a case like this genuinely requires. Not the sudden, direct warming that instinct might suggest, plunging cold hands straight into hot water or holding them too close too quickly to open flame, but a slower, gentler restoration. Hands held a careful distance from the fire at first, wrapped loosely in a warmed cloth, allowed to regain their warmth gradually rather than all at once, the way your own master taught you very firmly, many years ago now, was the only truly safe way to treat flesh that had been dangerously chilled. You watch his fingers carefully as the color slowly, gradually returns to them, asking him questions all the while. How far he has traveled today, how long his hands were exposed, whether he can feel your careful touch along each fingertip in turn, building, question by careful question, a clear picture of exactly how serious this exposure has been. It is, you judge with some relief after several careful minutes of watching and questioning, a bad chill rather than a true and lasting frostbite, severe enough to have frightened him properly, but not, so far as you can tell, deep enough to have done any permanent harm, provided he is warmed carefully now and kept warm and dry through the rest of this bitter night. You prepare him a cup of the same warming posset you were enjoying yourself only minutes before, generously spiced, and you send him, once his hands have properly regained their color and feeling, onward with clear directions to the inn, kept a short distance further along the street, where a warm bed and a hot meal will do the rest of the work your fire and your careful hands have only begun tonight. You press a small pot of comfrey salve into his hand besides, for whatever tenderness remains in his fingers once the deeper chill has properly passed, and you refuse, gently but firmly, the coin he tries to offer you for a kindness you consider, on a night this cold, simply the ordinary decency owed to any traveler caught unprepared by a winter storm. He thanks you genuinely and more than once, the particular heartfelt gratitude of a man who understands, better now than he did an hour ago, exactly how much worse this evening might have gone for him, and he steps back out into the cold and the still steadily falling snow, bound now for the warm bed waiting only a short distance further along the street. You watch him go from your doorway, judging the distance a safe one even in this weather, and you close the door at last against the cold, returning to your own cooling cup of posset and your own fire, feeling, as you settle back onto your stool, the particular quiet satisfaction of a day that has once again asked a great deal of you and found you, each time ready to meet it. Not long after the traveller's departure, the door opens once more, this time to your own apprentice, returning at last from an errand that has kept him out through most of the fading afternoon and now well into evening, delivering a store of dried remedies to a household some way outside the town, who could not easily make the journey into the shop themselves this deep into winter. He arrives stamping snow from his boots with the particular vigorous relief of someone young enough to still find a long cold walk more invigorating than exhausting, though you notice, watching him settle by the fire, the tired set of his shoulders that tells you the walk, however he might play it down, has cost him a good deal more than he lets on. You pour him a cup of what remains of the posset, still warm enough near the fire to serve, and he takes it gratefully, wrapping both hands around the cup the way anyone properly chilled instinctively does, drawing what warmth he can from it before he has even properly begun to drink. You ask him how the household fared. The elderly couple some way outside town, whose winter stores of remedy you had prepared for him to deliver, and he reports back carefully, the way you have trained him to across the 2 winters, he has now spent under your instruction, noting not only that the delivery was made successfully, but small useful details besides, that the old man's cough seemed a little improved since the apprentice's last visit, that their own store of firewood looked thin enough that you make a private note to mention it, gently, to a neighbor of theirs who might be persuaded toward a little seasonal generosity. You have come across these 2 winters to value your apprentice's careful, observant reports nearly as much as your own direct examination of a patient, and you tell him so, briefly but sincerely, watching the small, pleased flush of pride that crosses his face at the praise, quickly hidden behind another sip of his cooling posset, in the particular way of a young person still not entirely used to being told, plainly, that they have done good work. You remember, distantly, being exactly that age yourself, hungry for exactly this kind of quiet acknowledgement from your own master, and you try, as often as the day's business allows, to offer it as freely to your own apprentice as it was, eventually, though not always quickly enough, offered to you. He asks, between sips, about the day's other business, the customers who came and went while he was out on his errand, and you tell him, briefly, of the older woman's chilblains, the coughing child, the anxious messenger from the farmhouse, the servant from the manor house, and her master's aching joints, the traveller nearly caught, by a dangerous chill on the road. He listens carefully to each account, the way a good apprentice learns to, filing away not just the remedies given, but the small details of how each case was judged, what questions were asked, what signs told you a fever was ordinary rather than dangerous, a chill serious rather than merely uncomfortable. This, too, you have come to understand across your own years of training, is as much a part of what you are teaching him as any single remedy or preparation. Not simply what to reach for, but how to properly judge, case by patient case, exactly what a person in front of you actually needs. Together, you spend a little while longer tending to the last small tasks the evening requires, banking the kitchen fire lower now that supper is fully finished. Checking the front door's bar is set properly against the night, drawing the shutters more firmly closed against a wind that has picked up somewhat since full dark fell, carrying loose snow in fine, dry flurries along the length of the darkened street outside. Your apprentice yawns, once unguarded, and you send him up to his own small room above the shop's back storeroom before the hour grows any later, reminding him, as you do most winter evenings, to bank his own small brazier properly before he sleeps. A lesson you have repeated often enough now that he recites the proper method back to you, almost before you finish asking. The particular good-natured impatience of someone who knows a thing well enough to be slightly wary of being reminded of it. Alone again in the front room, the shop settling now into its final, deepest quiet of the day, you allow yourself one last slow circuit of the shelves before the night properly claims the space. Candle held up much as it was in the dark hour before this morning's dawn, though the wall of jars looks different now, somehow viewed at the close of a long day's work rather than at its beginning. Fuller in some places than others, the elderberry noticeably lower than it stood this morning, the Chilblains salve pots you rendered fresh this afternoon, already sitting proudly restocked among the older, more depleted rows, the whole wall telling, in its quiet way, the particular story of exactly what this one winter day has asked of your careful stores and how faithfully, on the whole, they have managed to answer it. With the apprentice settled upstairs and the shop's evening business largely finished, you allow yourself a slower, more reflective stretch of time than the day has offered you until now, and you find your thoughts drifting, as they often do at exactly this quiet hour, back across the whole long chain of remedies that filled the winter chest you opened so carefully this morning. It has been, you think, turning the season slowly over in your mind, a fuller catalogue of small human suffering and small human comfort than any single list could properly capture. And yet, sitting here now, in the settled quiet of your own closed shop, you find yourself wanting to hold the whole of it a little longer before sleep finally claims you. You think first of the coughs, the season's most faithful and most various complaint, arriving in as many different forms as there are different chests to carry them. The dry, tight cough of an ordinary chill, eased well enough with horehound and honey. The deeper, more troubling cough that settles properly into the chest and worries even the calmest household, softened by coltsfoot and mullein steeped gentle enough even for a small child. The old man's cough worn into permanence by enough hard winters, for which you have long since learned there is no true cure, only comfort, offered faithfully, season after season, for as long as he continues to climb your steps and ask for it. You think of the specific mixture of honey and vinegar, the oxymel your own master favored above almost any other remedy in his whole careful repertoire, sharp and sweet together, coating a raw throat more gently than either alone quite manages. You think, too, of the Chilblains, that most purely wintry of all complaints, asking so little of misfortune to occur, and yet troubling so very many hands and feet across the whole cold season. The comfrey and beeswax and tallow, rendered slowly this very afternoon into fresh salve, waiting now in its neat row of small clay pots for whatever cracked and painful fingers tomorrow's customers might bring through your door. The sharper mustard poultice, kept in reserve for the more severe cases, when simple salve alone cannot offer warmth enough. You think of your own master's old warning, learned the hard way in his own apprentice years. That mustard applied too directly and left too long burns as readily as it warms, a lesson passed down now, in its turn, to your own apprentice, who will likely, you suspect with a small private smile, learn some version of it the hard way himself before too many more winters have passed. You think of the fevers, always the most carefully weighed of the winter's complaints, requiring not simply a measured remedy, but careful judgment besides. The particular skill of telling an ordinary winter fever, uncomfortable but manageable, from something graver that might call for more than dried root and honest reassurance. Willow bark and meadowsweet and feverfew, each with its own particular strength, each demanding the kind of careful, attentive questioning you gave the anxious young messenger from the farmhouse this same afternoon. You think of him again now, and of his small sister somewhere out beyond the town walls, and you send, once more, that same quiet, wordless hope toward her that you sent earlier, trusting, as you have learned across many winters to trust. That careful preparation and honest attention have done what they properly could. And you think, finally, of the warming things, the cordials and possets and spiced comforts that sit alongside the season's proper remedies without quite belonging to the same careful category of medicine. The elderberry cordial, dark and spiced, shared this morning with yourself and later with a coughing child and a chilled traveller both. The mulled posset sent along to the manor house, at an old master's own generous request, meant for a whole household's comfort, rather than any single complaint. You have come, across many winters of practicing this trade, to believe that these warming things matter, nearly as much as any measured dose of willow bark or feverfew, that a body properly comforted heals more readily than a body merely treated, and that a good apothecary, however carefully trained in the more exact sciences of dose and preparation, ought never to forget the simple, ordinary power of warmth, freely and generously offered. You rise from your stool at last, the candle burned lower still, and cross once more to the wall of jars, running your fingers lightly along the familiar row of glazed vessels the way you might run a hand along the spine of a well-loved book. Each jar, you think, holds not only a remedy, but a small story besides. The summer morning it was gathered, the careful hours spent drying it properly, the particular customer or complaint it was most recently called upon to ease. You have never written any of these smaller stories down, not in the Almanac and not anywhere else, and yet you carry them, somehow, in the same quiet, patient part of yourself that carries the whole slow rhythm of this trade, season folding into season, winter following faithfully after winter, each one adding its own small chapter to a book that exists nowhere but in your own careful memory and in the steady, accumulating wisdom of the shop itself. You think briefly of the winters that came before this one, the particular hard season some years back when the snow lay so deep and so long that half the town's usual paths grew entirely impassable for the better part of a month. And you and your own master, still living then, worked nearly around the clock to keep pace with a season's worth of chilblains and coughs and fevers all arriving at once, exhausted by the end of most days in a way this present winter, milder by comparison, has not yet quite demanded of you. You remember too a gentler winter, warmer than most, when the shop's whole trade slowed to something closer to a pleasant, unhurried trickle, and you and your master spent the long, quiet evenings, instead in exactly the kind of careful reading and careful teaching that filled the earliest, most formative years of your own apprenticeship. Every winter, you have come to understand, ask something slightly different of a shop like this one, and a good apothecary learns, across enough of them, to meet whatever particular demand each season brings without complaint, and ideally, without too much surprise. The candle gutters faintly, reminding you, gently, that the hour has grown later than you quite realized, and you allow yourself one final, unhurried look around the darkened shop before turning, at last, toward the true close of the day, the counter wiped clean once more since the evening's last customer, the winter chest, its 3 drawers, closed and quiet, replenished this very day with fresh salve and freshly ground powder, ready for whatever tomorrow's cold might ask of it. The almanac, closed and waiting beneath the counter, your own small note added this afternoon, beside your master's many older ones, one more quiet link in a chain of careful watching that stretches back, now further than you can easily count. It has been, you think, one final time, exactly the kind of day this trade has always, at its best, offered you. Not dramatic, not urgent, only steady, patient, careful work, one small kindness following faithfully after another, from the dark hour before dawn to this quiet, settling hour of late evening. You find, turning it all over one last time in the low, guttering candlelight, that you would not trade it, this small warm shop and its slow winter rhythm, for any grander or busier life you might once, as a much younger apprentice, have imagined for yourself instead. Sitting here in the low, settling light, you find your mind wandering back, as it sometimes does on quiet evenings like this one, to the years of your own training, long before you stood behind this counter as its master rather than its apprentice. You remember the guild hall where you first swore your oath, a cold stone room not unlike this shop in its bones, though busier, always, with the comings and goings of older apothecaries, and their own apprentices, each carrying some fresh problem or fresh preparation for the guild's collective wisdom to weigh in on. You remember the particular weight of that oath, spoken aloud before witnesses, promising honest measure, careful preparation, and a steady refusal to promise more than any remedy could truly deliver. A promise you have tried, across every winter since, to keep faithfully. Much of what you learned in those earliest years came not from any single book, but from the old, careful theory that still shaped, and shapes even now, the whole practice of this trade. The belief passed down from the ancient physicians, and carried forward faithfully through generations of monastery infirmaries and guild halls alike, that a body's health rests upon a careful balance of 4 humours, blood and phlegm, and the 2 biles, each humour associated with its own particular quality of heat or cold, wetness or dryness. Winter, your old teachers always insisted, was above all else a cold and wet season, and its particular illnesses, the coughs and chills and aching joints that fill your winter chest so faithfully every year, were understood as an excess of cold, wet phlegm settling too heavily into the body, requiring remedies of an opposing, warming nature to properly restore the balance. It is why you have come to understand across your own years of practice, so many of the season's remedies lean so heavily toward warmth, not merely warmth of temperature, though that certainly helps, but warmth of quality, the particular heating virtue that the old physicians believed lived within ginger and cinnamon and clove, within the sharp mustard poultice, within the whole warming family of spiced cordials and possets you have prepared so many times across this single long day alone. Whether the deeper theory behind it holds entirely true, you have never been fully certain, not in the careful, exact way a guild examiner might have once demanded of you, but you have watched it work, season after season, closely enough that you have never seriously doubted the practical wisdom passed down within it. However uncertain its deeper philosophy might sometimes seem when you turn it over slowly in a quiet evening like this one, you think, too, of the long chain of trade and travel that brings certain of your rarer remedies to this small shop at all, a chain stretching far beyond anything you have ever seen with your own eyes. The cinnamon bark kept so carefully at the back of your winter chest travels, you have been told by merchants who claim to know such things, from islands and coasts many months' journey from here, passed hand to hand through a long line of traders, before it ever reaches the spice merchant in the larger town 2 days' ride away, from whom you yourself purchase your own small yearly measure. The cloves travel further still, by some accounts, from islands almost beyond imagining, small and precious enough that you use them as sparingly as you use anything in this whole shop, a single clove doing the careful, warming work that a whole handful of some humbler dried leaf might otherwise be needed for. It has always struck you, turning this thought over on quiet evenings exactly like this one, how strange and how wonderful it is that a shop this small, in a town this modest, at the very edge of a whole hard winter, should hold within its walls things gathered from so very far away, alongside the elderberries and hyssop and comfrey grown and gathered within an easy walk of your own front door. The humble and the exotic, sitting side by side upon the same shelf, called upon together, in careful combination, to ease the very same coughing chest or aching joint. You have never quite decided whether this strikes you as a small miracle or simply the ordinary, patient way that trade and travel and careful preparation, worked at faithfully across enough generations, quietly gather the whole wide world's small comforts into even the smallest and most unassuming of shops. You remember, too, your own master's particular insistence, drilled into you across your earliest years of training and passed on now, in your turn, to your own apprentice, that the guild's careful oath and the old physician's careful theory both mattered rather less, in the end, than the simple, steady habit of watching a patient closely and listening carefully to what they actually told you, rather than fitting them too hastily into whatever theory or remedy happened to be most convenient. It is a lesson you returned to more than once across this same long day, weighing the farmhouse messenger's careful description against your own accumulated experience, judging the traveler's chilled hands by careful, patient examination rather than by rushing straight to whatever remedy instinct alone might have suggested. The theory gives you a starting frame. Your master always said, but the patient in front of you gives you the truth of the matter, and a good apothecary learns, across enough winters, to hold the two together without ever letting the first entirely overrule the second. The candle has burned low enough now, watching it flicker from your stool, that you know sleep is not far off, but not so low that a few more minutes of quiet reflection would trouble it, and you allow yourself one further indulgence before the evening's true final task, crossing to the small back door of the shop, bolted fast against the cold, and drawing back its narrow shutter just far enough to look out, briefly, upon the walled physic garden that lies beyond it. The same garden whose careful summer bounty fills nearly every jar on the wall behind you. In the warmer months it is a small, orderly world of raised beds and gravelled paths, each bed given over to its own particular family of plants, the cooling herbs kept carefully apart from the warming ones, the roots given deeper, richer soil than the more delicate flowering things beside them. Tonight, beneath its heavy blanket of snow, it is almost impossible to make out any of that careful order at all. Only soft white mounds, faintly blue in the last dim light, marking where each bed lies dormant beneath the frozen ground, indistinguishable at a glance from any ordinary patch of snow-covered earth. You have always found something quietly reassuring in this particular winter view, however little there is, in truth, to actually see. The garden is not gone, only resting, every root and every dormant seed beneath, that soft white cover holding, patiently, the whole of next summer's harvest within itself, waiting only for the thaw and the lengthening days to begin once more. Its own slow, faithful cycle of growth. You think of the comfrey root you rendered into salve only this afternoon, and beneath the snow, somewhere in that same bed, its parent plant lies quietly dormant, gathering its own strength for the spring shoots that will, eventually, replace what this whole winter's chilblains and cracked hands have steadily drawn from your careful stores. The garden rests, in winter, the way you yourself will rest soon enough tonight, not idle exactly, but gathering itself, patiently and invisibly, toward whatever the coming season will next ask of it. You remember planting the very first beds of this garden yourself, many years ago now, under your own master's careful direction, learning as you worked exactly which herbs preferred the garden's sheltered southern wall and which tolerated, even preferred, the harder, more exposed ground near its northern edge. You remember, too, the particular satisfaction of watching that first summer's plantings finally come into their own, the beds filling in gradually from bare, turned earth into the dense, fragrant abundance that has fed this shop's winter chest, in one form or another, for every year since. A garden, your master told you often, is simply patience made visible, and you have never found reason across all your years since to doubt him. You close the small shutter again at last, gently, against the cold, and slide the bolt back into its place, and you cross back to the front room's hearth, where the fire, though burned low, still glows steady enough to properly attend to. Somewhere beyond your walls, faint but unmistakable in the deep, settled quiet of the evening, the town's own bells sound their hour, the same familiar bells that have marked every day of your working life in this shop, ringing now, as they always do at this particular late hour, a slow, measured call toward rest that the whole town, you know from long experience, is largely already heeding. You think, briefly, of the town beyond your own small shop as those bells fade back into silence, of the baker whose ovens will need lighting again in only a handful of hours, of the smith whose forge sits cold and quiet now until proper daylight returns to justify its fuel, of the watchman making his own slow, patient rounds along streets grown nearly impassable with drifted snow, his lantern the only real light left moving anywhere in the whole sleeping town. You think of the manor house beyond the walls, its old master hopefully easing now into a more comfortable night with the willow bark and the warming compress the servant carried home earlier this same evening. You think, once more and finally, of the farmhouse further out still, and the small, feverish child you never saw with your own eyes, but whose recovery you have carried. In some quiet corner of your attention, across the whole of this long day, this too, you have come to understand, is part of what this trade quietly asks of anyone who practices it faithfully across enough winters. Not simply the measuring and the grinding and the careful preparation, but this wider, gentler kind of attention held toward a whole town's worth of small, ordinary suffering and small, ordinary comfort. Most of it never seen directly, most of it trusted, in the end, to the same careful remedies and the same honest instruction you have offered, patiently, to everyone who crossed your threshold today. You cannot walk every cold mile to every worried household in the parish, but you can and do send with every remedy that leaves your shop a small, careful piece of your own attention besides. And you have come, across many winters, to believe that this matters nearly as much as any dried root or careful measure. Before you finally rise to see to the fire, your gaze falls once more upon the small shelf kept apart from the working counter, the one holding your shop's own book of simples, its leather cover worn soft and dark with handling, its pages filled with careful recipes copied out, generation after generation, by hands long since gone still. You take it down now, gently, and let it fall open where its spine has grown accustomed to opening. A page devoted, as it happens, to the particular remedies, proper to a midwife's own winter calling, and you allow yourself a few final quiet minutes with it, before the candle finally gives out. Your own shop has long supplied the town's midwives with whatever the season required of them, and winter, you have found across many years of this particular trade, asks its own careful set of remedies quite apart from the ordinary coughs and chilblains that fill most of your day. A Cordial, warm and spiced much like the posset you shared with your own apprentice only hours ago, given to a woman recently delivered of her child, to build back her strength through the cold, demanding weeks that follow a difficult birth. Raspberry leaf, dried and kept ready, though used, your book cautions carefully in a hand several generations older than your own, only as the confinement itself draws near, and never carelessly before it. Mugwort too is noted here, though marked in the same old careful hand, with a small warning against its use in the earlier months of a woman's carrying. a caution you have always respected exactly as faithfully as it was first written down for you. You think, turning these worn pages slowly, of how much of this trade's quietest, most essential work happens not across your own counter at all, but through the hands of the midwives themselves, women who carry your careful remedies out into the coldest, most difficult hours a household can face, a birth in the depth of winter, snow thick against the windows, no easy way to send for further help should anything go wrong. You think of the small woodcut illustration pressed into the corner of this very page, faded now nearly past recognition, showing a woman propped upon pillows, a steaming cup held to her lips by another beside her, a simple, careful image copied faithfully from some older manuscript by whichever hand first began this particular book, long before your own master's time, let alone your own. The book itself, you have always understood, is older than any single person who has kept this shop, its earliest pages written in a careful, cramped hand quite different from any that came after. Its later editions, your own masters among them, and now, in a few careful places, your own, showing the slow, patient accumulation of an entire trade's knowledge, passed forward faithfully from one careful keeper to the next. You have added only a little to it yourself so far, a small note here about a preparation you found improved by a slight change in method, a brief record there of a particularly hard winter and which remedies proved most needed against it. You think, sometimes, of your own apprentice one day, adding his own careful notes to these same worn pages, long after you yourself have gone the way of your master before you, and you find the thought, tonight as most nights, a quietly comforting rather than a sorrowful one. You close the book gently at last, and return it to its place upon the shelf, and you sit for one final moment in the low, guttering candlelight, feeling the particular stillness that settles over a shop and over its keeper at the very close of a long and faithfully tended day. There is nothing more, you know, that tonight properly requires of you beyond the one task still remaining, the fire, waiting patiently for your attention, exactly as it has waited, in one form or another, at the close of every single day you have kept this shop. You allow your thoughts, in this last quiet stretch, before the fire's true attention, to drift once more across the whole shape of the season still ahead, the slow calendar of a medieval winter, that every apothecary carries somewhere in the back of their mind, alongside the almanac's more particular weather signs. There is still a long stretch of true cold to come before the light begins properly to lengthen again, the deepest, hardest weeks of the whole year still waiting somewhere ahead of tonight, rather than safely behind it. Candlemas will come first, a little past the middle of the season, when custom holds that half the winter's store of wood and food ought still to remain in hand, if a household means to see itself safely through to spring, and you find yourself doing, once again, the same quiet private accounting you performed earlier this same evening over your own shelves, judging your winter chest stores against the weeks still to come with the same careful attention a good farmer gives his own granary at exactly this point in the year. You think of the particular customs the town keeps around that midwinter feast, candles blessed and carried in careful procession through streets very like the one beyond your own shuttered window. A festival of light held, deliberately, at the very darkest, coldest heart of the year, as though the whole town had agreed, long before your own lifetime, that the depth of winter was exactly the moment that called most for a little deliberate warmth and brightness rather than less. You have always found something quietly wise in that timing, a lesson not unlike the one your own trade teaches you daily, that comfort matters most and ought to be offered most generously, precisely when the season itself offers the least of its own accord. Beyond Candlemas, you know from long experience, the days will lengthen only slowly at first, each one barely perceptibly longer than the last, the cold holding stubbornly on for weeks after the light itself has begun, technically, to improve. It is often, your own master used to say, the hardest stretch of the whole winter to bear patiently, precisely because the promise of spring has become visible enough to hope for, and yet remains still weeks, sometimes more than a month, from properly arriving. You have learned, across enough such stretches, to meet them the same way you meet every other part of this long trade, with steady, patient attention rather than impatience, trusting the slow turn of the season the same way you trust a properly banked fire to still be glowing when you return to it. However long and however dark the intervening hours might feel while you wait them out, you think, too, in this quiet last stretch of the evening, of all the other trades in this small town that keep their own faithful watch through exactly this same deep winter night, each one carrying its own particular burden of care through the cold, dark hours while the rest of the household or the town sleeps soundly around them. The baker, whose ovens must be coaxed to life again in only a handful of hours, tending his own kind of banked fire through his own version of tonight's careful preparation. The watchman, making his slow rounds along streets you can no longer even see from your own shuttered window, lantern held high against a dark that would otherwise swallow every street and alley whole. The midwife, perhaps, somewhere across the town this very night, sitting beside some laboring mother with a warm Cordial close at hand, drawing on exactly the same worn book of simples that sits now, closed again, upon your own shelf. You have come, across many winters of keeping this shop, to feel a quiet kinship with all of them, this scattered fellowship of careful night workers who keep a town alive and comfortable through its coldest, darkest hours, each in their own small corner, mostly unseen by one another, mostly unthanked beyond the ordinary gratitude of whoever they happen to serve on any given night. It is not a grand feeling, this kinship, nor one you would ever think to speak aloud to anyone, even your own apprentice, but it settles over you gently on evenings, exactly like this one, a quiet, private comfort of its own, knowing that your own small, careful watch tonight is only one thread among many, all of them woven together, faithfully and mostly invisibly, into the whole warm, sleeping fabric of the town beyond your walls. Somewhere in the deep quiet beyond your own hearth, you know this same night is being kept by hands and habits very like your own in shops not unlike this one, in towns you have never visited and never will, following recipes copied from books not unlike your own worn volume of simples, tending fires banked in stone hearths shaped, more or less, exactly like your own. It is a strange and quietly comforting thought that this particular trade, practiced carefully across so many small shops in so many small towns, forms its own kind of steady, patient thread running through the whole cold season, one banked fire and one careful remedy at a time, largely unremarked, entirely necessary, faithfully renewed every single winter night regardless of who happens to be tending it. You find yourself, in these last unhurried minutes, thinking back once more to the very beginning of this same long day. The dark, cold hour before dawn, when you first crept down the narrow stair to find the fire's low red heart still glowing beneath its careful blanket of ash. It seems, somehow both very close and very far away at once, that first quiet hour, the whole long day's worth of small work and small kindness stretched out between it and this present moment. And you find a certain satisfaction in tracing the day's whole shape backward through your memory, one careful task following faithfully after another, the way you might trace a single thread of embroidery back along its whole careful path to see how a finished pattern was actually built. The morning's slow survey of the shelves, candle held up before a whole wall of careful summer foresight. The first cup of elderberry cordial, taken alone in the quiet, before the shop properly opened. The older woman's chilblains, the coughing child, the young mother's careful, worried questions answered as honestly and as calmly as you knew how. The steady grinding of root and bark through the cold, patient hours of mid-morning, hands stiffening and warming and stiffening again by turns. The brief, precious hour of proper daylight spent on the fine, close work that only good light allows. The anxious young messenger from the farmhouse, and the careful, weighed remedies sent home with him against his sister's fever. The wax rendered slowly into fresh salve, 6 new pots set out to cool upon the windowsill. The old almanac, and your own small note added beside your master's many older ones. The snow falling steadily while the lavender water gathered, drop by patient drop, in its waiting vessel below the small copper still. The candles lit, one by careful one, against the gathering dark. The manor house servant and her master's aching joints. The traveller nearly caught by a dangerous chill, your own apprentice, tired but quietly proud, returning at last from his own long cold errand into the warmth of this same small shop. It has been, viewed now in this final quiet accounting, exactly the kind of day this trade has always, at its steadiest and its best, offered you across so many winters now behind you. Nothing dramatic, nothing that will be remembered likely by anyone beyond the small handful of people it directly touched, and yet held together now in this one last unhurried moment before sleep finally claims you. It feels, somehow, like a whole life's worth of quiet purpose, gathered carefully into a single ordinary winter day, each small kindness offered without any particular thought to whether it would be noticed or remembered, each careful remedy measured out simply because someone, somewhere in this cold town, genuinely needed it. One further volume sits beside your own worn book of simples upon its narrow shelf, a copy, made many years ago by a careful scribe's hand, and purchased by your master long before you yourself ever crossed this shop's threshold, of a herbal compiled originally by a Rhineland abbess some centuries past, a woman who set down, alongside her prayers and her visions, a whole careful accounting of plants and their properties, drawn as much from her own convent's garden and infirmary as from any older, borrowed authority. You take it down now too, in this last unhurried stretch of the evening, and let it fall open, as it so often does, to a page devoted to fennel, its small woodcut illustration rendered, simply but carefully, roots and feathered leaves and seed heads all shown together in the same patient, exact hand that fills the whole one volume. You have always felt a particular fondness for this book, more so, in some private way, than for your own shop's plainer working volume, because it carries within it something of the quiet, contemplative life of the convent infirmary, from which its knowledge first sprang, herbs gathered and dried by women who kept their own steady rhythm of prayer and labor, not unlike the steady rhythm you yourself keep across a winter's working day. You think, turning its pages slowly, of the monastery infirmaries you have heard spoken of by traveling physicians passing through this town. Walled physic gardens, not unlike your own, kept behind cloister walls, in abbeys scattered the length and breadth of the country, each one quietly adding, across generations of careful monks and nuns, to the same long, patient inheritance of plant knowledge that fills your own more modest shelves tonight. It strikes you, as it has struck you before on quiet evenings, exactly like this one, how much of what you know, and how much of what fills your own winter chest, arrived in your hands only because some careful person, long dead now, and mostly unremembered by name, took the trouble to write it down clearly enough that it could be copied, and copied again, and carried forward faithfully across all the years between their own working life and yours. The abbess's careful fennel entry, your master's older notes in the almanac beneath your counter, the worn woodcut of a woman propped upon pillows in your book of midwife's remedies. All of it inherited, all of it kept faithfully, all of it, now, quietly entrusted to your own hands for however many winters still remain to you before it passes, in its turn, to your apprentice, and to whatever careful additions his own hand will eventually add beside your own. You close the herbal gently and return it to its place, and you allow yourself, one final time this evening, to simply sit with the quiet weight of that inheritance, this whole long, patient chain of careful hands stretching back further than any single memory can properly reach, and reaching forward too, you trust, considerably further than your own working life will carry it. It is, you think, turning toward the fire at last, one of the truest comforts this old trade has ever offered you, not the curing of any single cough or fever, welcome as that always is, but this deeper, steadier comfort of belonging to something larger and more patient than any one winter, any one shop, any one careful pair of hands. You allow your eyes to travel once more, slowly, across the whole familiar shape of the shop around you, softened now almost to shadow by the last low light of the guttering candle and the fire's own dimming glow. The long oak counter, worn smooth by years of measuring and grinding and careful, patient work. The heavy stone mortar, cold and quiet now until tomorrow's grinding calls it back to use. The winter chest, its 3 drawers closed and replenished, ready for whatever chilblain or cough or low fever the coming days might still bring through your door. The small copper still, wiped clean and set back in its corner, its work of drawing lavender water from dried summer flowers finished now until the next quiet afternoon calls for it again. Beyond the shuttered window, you know without needing to look again, the snow has likely settled by now into its final, softest fall of the whole evening, and the street outside lies buried deeper than it has been at any point since the season began in earnest, every rooftop and sill and cart track smoothed into the same gentle, rounded shape you noticed this very morning when you first opened the shutters onto a transformed and silent town. Tomorrow, Some of that snow will already have been disturbed. Footprints crossing it here and there, a cart track cut carefully through its center. The ordinary business of a town that cannot, however hard the winter, entirely stop simply because the world outside has turned white and cold and still. But tonight, for these last few quiet minutes, it remains untouched, exactly as it fell. A whole town wrapped gently in the same patient hush that has settled, in its own way, over your own small shop as well. You think, one final time, before rising properly to the fire, of how strange and how fitting it feels that a trade built so entirely around warmth, around fire tended faithfully through the darkest hours, around cordials and possets and salves, meant to ease the particular hardships only deep cold can bring, should find its truest, steadiest rhythm in exactly this coldest, quietest season of the whole year. Summer brings its own harvest and its own busy, sunlit hours of gathering and drying, but winter, you have come to believe across many years of practicing this old craft, is when the trade's whole deeper purpose reveals itself most clearly in the chilblain eased, the fever gently broken, the aching joint given what comfort a careful hand and a careful remedy can honestly offer. It is not, perhaps, the season most apothecaries would choose to call their favorite, and you have never been entirely certain you would call it your own favorite either. But it is, without any doubt, the season in which this shop, and the trade it keeps, matters most plainly and most directly to the small, cold, faithful town gathered around it. You remember, in this last drifting moment, before you finally rise, a particular piece of advice your own master gave you on one of your very first winter evenings in this shop, many years ago now, when you were still young enough to find the long, cold hours faintly daunting rather than familiar and welcome. He found you, that evening, sitting exactly where you sit now, staring rather too anxiously at a fire you were not yet fully confident of banking correctly, worried, in the particular earnest way of a new apprentice, that you would somehow fail at even this small, ordinary task and wake to a cold, dead hearth the next morning. He sat beside you a while and told you, gently, that every apothecary who had ever kept this shop, himself included, had woken at least once to exactly that cold, dead hearth you feared, and had simply struck a new flame, a little more slowly and a little more stiffly than usual, and gone on with the day regardless. The fire, he told you, matters a great deal, but it does not matter so much that a single failed night should trouble your sleep. Tend it as carefully as you can, and then let it go, and trust the morning to sort out whatever the night could not properly hold. You have carried that small piece of advice with you across every winter since, applying it, in time, well beyond the simple matter of a banked hearth, to nearly every uncertain judgment this trade has asked of you across the years. The fever you cannot be entirely certain will break cleanly. The chilblain that may or may not improve as quickly as you would like. The messenger sent home with careful remedies and careful instructions, whose family's fate you cannot follow beyond your own front door. Tend it as carefully as you can, and then let it go, and trust the morning, and the season, and the whole slow patient turning of this old trade, to carry forward whatever your own two hands cannot entirely hold onto themselves. It is, you think, settling at last toward the true close of this long day, as good a lesson as any this trade has ever taught you, and you find yourself glad, in this quiet final moment, to have had a master patient enough to offer it to you exactly when you most needed to hear it. On a cold winter evening, not so very different, in its own quiet way, from this one. Outside one last time, you imagine rather than hear the particular deep quiet that has settled now over every corner of the sleeping town. The baker's oven still cold and waiting. The smith's forge banked much as your own hearth soon will be. The watchman's lantern moving slow and steady somewhere along a street you cannot see. The manor house settling, you hope, into an easier night than the one before it. The farmhouse further out still holding, you trust, a fever finally beginning to break. Every one of these small, separate rooms, scattered across a whole cold, snow-buried parish, tended tonight by careful hands not unlike your own, each one keeping its own small, faithful watch until morning comes again to relieve it. You breathe out slowly, feeling the whole long day settle at last into something close to rest within you, and you turn, finally and fully, toward the one task still properly waiting. There is a particular kind of stock-taking that belongs only to this last hour of a winter evening, quieter and gentler than the almanac's careful weather notes or the morning's brisk survey of the shelves, closer to simple gratitude than to any real accounting at all, and you allow yourself a final slow pass through it now, sitting in the very last of the candle's low light. You think of the elderberries, hedgerow dark and sweet, still holding generous in their jar, despite a whole day's steady use in cordial and comfort both. You think of the horehound and the coltsfoot, and the mullein softening still, patiently, whatever coughs the coming week will bring to your door. You think of the willow bark, bitter and faithful, and the feverfew and meadowsweet beside it, ready for whatever aching joint or low fever tomorrow's cold might still produce. You think of the Chilblains salve, 6 fresh pots cooled and shelved this very afternoon, waiting for hands not yet known to you, cracked and reddened by a cold not yet fully lived through. You think of the mustard, sharp and warming, kept carefully in reserve. You think of the cinnamon and the clove and the ginger, precious and sparingly used, and of the honey, kept soft and ready near the hearth, exactly as it has been kept, in one shop or another, very like this one, for as many winters as anyone now living can properly remember. Each of these small stores, you think, gathered and dried and carefully kept through a whole long, patient year, exists for no grander purpose than this: to be here, ready on an ordinary cold evening, for whatever ordinary trouble the season brings to an ordinary door. There is no single dramatic cure among them, no remedy that will be remembered or written of long after this particular winter has passed into the next. And yet, taken together, patiently kept and patiently offered, day after day and season after season, they have eased, across this one day alone, an old woman's aching fingers, a small child's frightened cough, a farmhouse's anxious fever, an elderly master's restless joints, a stranger's dangerously chilled hands. It strikes you, turning this thought over one final time in the settling quiet, that this is very likely the truest measure of the whole trade. Not any single remarkable cure, but this steady, faithful accumulation of small comforts, offered without fanfare to whoever happens to need them, on whatever ordinary day they happen to arrive. You allow the thought to settle unhurried, the way you have allowed every other thought to settle across this whole long, patient day. And you find, at last, that you are properly ready. in every sense that matters, for the final small task the evening still asks of you. You glance once more toward the small window beside the door, its lower panes still traced with the same delicate frost patterns you noticed this very morning, though thicker now, built up across the whole long day's steady cold into something closer to a proper garden of ice, fine branching ferns and soft-feathered walls climbing higher up the glass than they stood at dawn. You have always thought there was something faintly herbal in the shape frost takes on a cold pane, the same patient, branching logic that shapes a fern's unfurling leaf, or a root's slow spread beneath the soil, as though the cold itself, given glass enough and time enough, could not help but grow something that looked, at least a little, like the very plants your whole trade depends upon. It is a fanciful thought. You know, the kind your master would have gently teased you for entertaining too seriously. And you allow yourself a small, private smile at your own indulgence before turning your attention, finally and completely, away from the window and back toward the low, waiting fire. The candle beside you gutters once, twice, and steadies again, its flame grown small and blue at the edges, the particular sign, you know from long experience, that it has not very much longer left to burn. You will not need it much longer either. The final task remaining to you tonight is one your hands could perform in complete darkness, if they had to, guided by nothing more than long, careful habit and the fire's own faint, familiar glow. You think, one final time, of tomorrow, still hours away, but already, in its quiet way, beginning to take shape in your mind exactly as it always does at this closing hour. Another dark rising before any bell has rung. Another careful raking of ash to find, you trust, the same low red heart of coal still glowing faithfully beneath it. Another slow walk along the wall of jars, candle held before you, taking stock of what the season's stores still hold. Another day, in short, very like this one, and very like all the many winter days that came before it, and very like, you suspect, all the many that will still follow after, for as long as you continue to keep this small, warm shop against the deep cold of this old and patient trade. You find, turning that thought over one final time, that you are entirely content with the prospect, and you rise at last, fully and finally, toward the fire. Somewhere beneath the settled hush of the whole sleeping town, you imagine the season itself turning, slowly and invisibly, one more small degree closer toward the distant, still unseen thaw, the way it has turned, patiently and faithfully, every single winter night, since long before your own master first learned this trade, and every winter night still to come, long after your own careful hands have finally set it down for good. You breathe once more, slow and even, letting the last of the day's careful attention settle fully into rest. The candle's small blue flame steady now beside you, the fire's low glow patient and warm at your back, the whole quiet shop holding, around you, everything it has held all day, and everything it will hold again tomorrow, remedy and root and careful, faithful hand, all gathered together in this one small, warm room against the deep, unbroken cold of a whole medieval winter. Even the mortar, cold and silent, now upon its worn patch of counter, seems to hold something of this same settled patience, waiting without complaint for tomorrow's grinding the way it has waited, night after night, across every winter of your working life, and every winter of your master's before you, stone worn smooth, not by any single hurried afternoon, but by this same slow, faithful accumulation of ordinary evenings, each one closing quietly, unremarkably, exactly as this one is closing now. The fire has burned low enough now, watching it from your stool, that you know the true final task of the evening can no longer be properly delayed, and you rise at last to attend to it, the one upon which tomorrow's early hour, the very same quiet hour that began this day for you, will entirely depend. Banking a fire properly for the night is a skill that took you longer to learn well than almost any other part of this trade. Longer even than the careful grinding of a root to its proper fine powder, longer than the patient judging of a fever's true seriousness. It looks, to anyone watching from outside the craft, like a simple thing, merely covering a fire with ash and leaving it to smolder until morning. But you have burned your own fingers more than once across your apprentice years, learning exactly how much ash, packed exactly how loosely or how firmly, over a fire built exactly how large, will still be glowing gently when you come to it again in the dark hours before dawn. Tonight's fire has burned well and steady through the whole of a long day, and you judge it now, crouching before the hearth with the same careful attention you gave every remedy measured out across the hours since, to be exactly the right size and strength for a proper banking. You rake the coals first into a compact, even mound at the center of the hearth, drawing in the last scattered embers from the fire's edges so that nothing is left to burn out wastefully and alone through the long, cold night ahead. Then, slowly and with the particular care this task always demands, you cover the mound with a generous, even layer of fine grey ash, thick enough to smother any open flame, but not so thick nor packed so tightly as to entirely starve the coals beneath of the small, slow trickle of air they will need to survive until morning. It is, in its own quiet way, an act of faith, this nightly banking, a trust placed in a fire you cannot see or tend again until many hours have passed, a belief, built on years of careful practice, that what you have covered so carefully tonight will still be there, patient and glowing, waiting only for your hand and your breath to coax it back to proper life once more. You have rarely been disappointed in that faith, across all your years of practicing it, though you remember distantly a handful of harder winters, a fire banked too hastily on an exhausted evening, waking the next morning to nothing but cold, dead ash, and the considerably harder work of striking an entirely new flame from flint and char cloth, with fingers already stiff from the night's deep cold. Those mornings taught you, more thoroughly than any lecture from your own master ever quite managed, exactly why this nightly ritual deserves the careful attention you give it now, however tired the day's long hours have left you. With the fire properly banked, you allow yourself, for a few final minutes, to simply sit beside it in the settling quiet of your own closed shop, the candle burning low now on the counter beside you, throwing its last warm light across the familiar shapes of the counter and the shelves and the quiet, patient wall of jars behind them. It has been, you think, turning the whole day over slowly in your mind, the way you often do at exactly this hour, an ordinary day, in most of the ways that matter. No great crisis, no illness beyond what your careful stores and your careful judgment could properly manage. Only the steady, patient rhythm of a trade practiced across a single long winter day. Chilblains eased, a child's cough soothed, A farmhouse fever met with careful remedy and honest reassurance. An old man's aching joints given what comfort could be offered. A stranger's dangerously chilled hands warmed carefully back from the edge of real harm. You think, too, of the season stretching still ahead of you, the weeks of winter yet to come before the first true signs of spring finally, gradually, begin to show themselves. There will be more days like this one, many more, each one asking its own particular mixture of small, steady demands from your careful stores and your careful hands. The Chilblains will keep coming, as they always do, until the last hard frost finally releases its grip on the town's fingers and toes. The coughs will likely worsen before they ease, as the coldest weeks of the whole year still lie somewhere ahead rather than behind you. There will be more anxious messengers, more worried mothers, more elderly patients whose old, familiar aches deepen with every degree the frost sets further in. You do not dread this, exactly, this knowledge of what still lies ahead. You have lived through enough winters now to know, with a kind of settled, hard-won confidence, that your careful stores and your careful hands are equal to whatever the season still intends to ask of you. You think, briefly and gently, of the farmhouse messenger's small sister, somewhere out beyond the town walls this same cold evening, and you send toward her, in the quiet way you have always privately done for patients whose fate you cannot yet know, a small, wordless hope that the fever has already begun, even now, to ease. You will hear word eventually. You know from long experience whether the remedies did their proper work, and until then, there is nothing more to be done but trust the careful preparation you offered and hope, as gently and as patiently as you have learned to hope across many winters of exactly this kind of necessary uncertainty. Your gaze drifts once more, in this quiet final stretch of the evening, along the wall of jars, and you find yourself thinking, not for the first time today, of the long chain of careful work that stands behind every single one of them. The early morning walks to the garden's edge, back in the warm months, gathering what the season offered before the day's heat grew too strong. The long afternoons of careful drying, herbs laid out in thin, even layers across clean linen, turned regularly, watched carefully for any sign of mood or spoilage that would ruin a whole season's careful gathering in a single careless afternoon. The slow, patient grinding and steeping and rendering that turns a simple dried leaf or root into something that can actually ease a coughing child or a feverish farmhouse or an old man's aching hip. Every jar on that wall represents, in its quiet way, months of careful foresight finally coming into its proper use, and there is something in that thought, turned over slowly in the settling quiet of your own closed shop, that you find yourself returning to often, on evenings exactly like this one. The candle has burned low enough now that you judge it time, at last, to properly close the day. You rise from your stool, joints a little stiff from the day's long hours of kneeling and bending and careful. Steady work, and you make one final slow circuit of the front room, checking that the shutters are barred properly against the night, that the door's own bar sits securely in its place, that nothing has been left carelessly out, that the cold or a stray draught might spoil before morning. It is the same careful attention you have given every single task across this whole long day, applied now, at its very close, to the simple act of properly putting the shop to bed alongside yourself. You climb the narrow stair at last, candle held carefully before you. The same stair you descended in full darkness so many hours ago now, at the very start of this long winter day. The small room above the shop has grown properly cold again in your long absence from it. The fire you did not light there this morning, having had no one to tend it through the day. But the bed itself, when you finally settle into it, still holds a faint, welcome trace of warmth from the woolen coverlet and the sheepskin laid across the foot of it. And you pull both clothes around yourself gratefully, feeling the days long. Steady work finally beginning to ease from your shoulders and your back, and the whole tired length of you. Outside, beyond your own small frosted window, the snow has finally begun to ease. The heavy, steady fall of the afternoon and evening softening now into something lighter, more occasional, drifting down in slow, scattered flakes rather than the dense, unbroken curtain of earlier hours. The wind, too, has quieted, and the particular deep hush that only a heavy winter snowfall brings has settled fully, now over the whole sleeping town, broken by nothing at all beyond the occasional, distant creak of a shutter or the soft, muffled call of some night bird somewhere beyond the town walls, sounds so faint and so far away that they seem, in this drowsy final hour, almost part of the silence itself, rather than any real interruption of it. You lie still for a little while, listening to that quiet, feeling the last of the evening's cold slowly, gradually give way to the gathering warmth of your own bed, and you let your thoughts drift, unhurried, back across the whole long day behind you. The dark, patient hour of the banked fire, coaxed carefully back to life before any bell had rung. The slow morning survey of the shelves, candle held up before a whole wall of careful summer foresight. The elderberry cordial, warm and spiced, shared first with yourself and then, across the day, with a coughing child and a chilled traveller both. The steady, patient grinding of root and bark, hands stiff with cold but growing warmer, slowly, with the familiar rhythm of the work. The brief, precious hour of proper midday light, used carefully for close work that candlelight cannot quite manage. The fever met with careful questions and honest reassurance, carried by a young messenger's anxious feet through the deepening snow. The wax rendered slowly into fresh salve against the cold. The old almanac, and your own careful note, added beside your master's, the small, quiet continuity of one careful hand following another across the years. The snow falling steadily beyond your window, while the lavender water gathered, drop by patient drop, in its waiting vessel, the candles lit, one by one, against the gathering dark. The servant from the manor house, and the traveller nearly caught by a dangerous chill, and your own apprentice, tired but proud, returning at last from his own long cold errand. It has been, you think again, settling deeper now into the warmth of your bed, a full day, in every sense the word properly carries. Full of small work, patiently done, full of small kindnesses, offered without much thought to whether they would be remembered or repaid. Full, too, of the particular quiet satisfaction that comes only from a trade practiced carefully and honestly across a whole long season, one careful day joined patiently to the next, one banked fire followed faithfully by another, until eventually, though not yet, not for many weeks still, the frost will finally begin to loosen its grip, and the whole slow cycle will turn once more towards spring. For tonight, though, there is only this: a warm bed in a cold room above a shop, kept faithfully through one more long winter day. A fire banked low and patient in the room below, waiting, as it always waits, to be coaxed gently back to life again in the dark hour before another dawn. A wall of jars, a little changed since this same hour yesterday, standing quiet and ready for whatever tomorrow might ask of them. And beyond your small frosted window, a whole sleeping town, wrapped deep in snow and settled, finally, into the particular deep, unbroken hush that only the heart of winter ever truly brings. If your own eyes have grown heavy by now, listening along beside this quiet winter day, that is exactly as it should be. There is nothing more this shop needs from you tonight. The fire is banked. The shutters are barred. The remedies are measured and shelved and waiting, patient as they always are, for whatever tomorrow's customers might need of them. You may let your own eyes close now, just as the apothecaries did, and let the same deep, settled quiet that has gathered over this whole snow-covered town gather now, gently, around you too. Sleep well. The quiet apothecary will be back again soon, with another slow season, another quiet chapter, another long, patient day to sit inside together. For now, only the snow continues, soft and slow and endless, falling steadily over rooftop and street and sleeping town alike. And the low fire, banked deep beneath its blanket of ash, keeps its own small, faithful warmth alive through the whole of the long, quiet winter night.